Eu vou dar agora instruções em português e a doutora Suzana o fará em inglês. Para a audiência, indicamos que os microfones sejam desligados para evitar ruído sobre a comunicação dos membros da mesa. Para participar do debate, é preciso solicitar a palavra através do chat da sessão Zoom. Na sequência, o microfone será ativado. Os papers estão disponíveis no fórum deste painel. Aproveitamos também para agradecer ao monitor desse painel, ao Júnior, ao professor Lúcio, que nos ajudou muito neste momento de dificuldades iniciais minhas. Então, para os panelistas, falando um pouco sobre as regras, elas são as seguintes. Cada apresentação não poderá durar mais do que 15 minutos, sendo seguida de 5 minutos para as perguntas e o debate. Entre a primeira e a segunda sessão, teremos um intervalo de 20 minutos e depois daremos início e retomaremos com a segunda sessão. Se alguém tiver dificuldade de rede na internet na hora da apresentação, esperamos e, se necessário, passamos à apresentação seguinte, voltando depois atrás para aquela que não conseguiu apresentar. Esta primeira sessão terá as seguintes apresentações. This first session will have the following presentations. Martial Arts, Mysticism and Belonging, Constructing Post-Conflict Masculinities in Timor-Leste, by Henry Mertinen. I don't know if my pronunciation is correct, sorry. Narratives of Violence, Peace and Power in Timor-Leste, da Roberta Holanda, e o vídeo do Alexandre Bueno e da Regina Brito, apresentando o trabalho Formas de Vida e Timor-Leste, Representações Sociais e Culturais em Discursos Timorenses. A segunda sessão contará com as seguintes apresentações. The second session will have the following presentations. China's COVID-19 Diplomacy in Timor-Leste, by Mica Barreto Soares. Caminhos que se cruzam, considerações etnográficas sobre processos de State Nation Building do Timor-Leste com a construção de si de estudantes timorenses no Brasil e em Portugal, eu que vou apresentar, Silvia Nogueira. Political Impasses, Number Guide This Timor's Contemporary Democracy, por Fernando Ximenes. Boa apresentação a todos e que tenhamos um agradável e produtivo debate. Good presentation to everyone and that we have a pleasant and productive debate. Thank you. Suzana, quer falar alguma coisa mais?
A few words, first of all, to say hello to everyone. Good morning or good afternoon for those in the Asia. Hi, Mika. Welcome. So we thought that the best would be for you to have presentations of 15 minutes, as we also said by email, so that there are time for just direct questions afterwards. And in the end of each session, we have more time for debate. So anyway, because the presentations sometimes are not much connected with each other, so that's why we thought it would be nice to have a time for direct questions. So, of course, we ask you to turn off your microphones while other people are presenting. And if there are no technical problems, each one of you will use directly your PowerPoints for the presentations. We have only one presentation that will be made by video, so we received the recording of it. It is the third presentation of this first session, which is by Alexandre, Marcelo Bueno and Regina Helena Pires de Brito. So they are not able to be here, and so they have sent us the video, and we will present it. And that's it. I mean, in any way, we will have enough time to wait if technical problems arrived. We didn't thought that they would start from the beginning with ourselves, with the coordination, but that's it. I mean, we will wait if there are any crash or any problems. We will wait for people to solve it, so that only in a very serious impossibility, then we will go along to the next presenter but hopefully everything will be all right. So the first presentation is by Henri Martin, and Michelle asks mysticism and belonging, and I think that you have a PowerPoint, right, Martin?
Yes.
Yes.
Should I share my screen?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
You can do it. Just try if it works.
Okay, just need to get the, great. Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Henri Murtinen, and I'll be presenting on some research that I've been doing over the past 10 years or so, looking at martial arts groups and ritual arts groups in Timor-Leste, and looking at how these groups kind of looking at the activities of these groups and looking at it specifically as how they allow the men, because it's mostly men who are involved, to navigate post-conflict society in Timor-Leste. So my research was in 2 rounds, basically. So my initial interviews were around by the time of the crisis in Timor from 2006 to 2008, and a bit after that. That was my PhD research, and then I went back in last year to do a second round of research, and I did some more interviews in January this year, and altogether it's about 60 interviews in mostly in Timor-Leste and a few in West Timor as well. The bulk of them were in Dili, and then a few in Baucau, but also in smaller places like Sumalai, Maubisse, Ainaro, Lisahila, Batuporo, and Likisa, and then, as mentioned, also in West Timor, in Atambua and Kupang. And the vast majority of these interviewees were men, even though all of the groups say that they're open to women. Only very few women actually participate, and out of my interviewees, only 3 were women. And initially, for my PhD thesis, I was focusing on masculinities and violence. And then with the second round, I was looking more broadly, what does membership in these groups give to the men? So my hypothesis is that these groups offer new avenues for men outside of the traditional pathways of gaining masculine status, ways of reestablishing masculine respect and navigate post-economic socioeconomic challenges, but also they have then beyond just these functions and kind of taken a life of their own in many ways. And something that I kind of want to also do with this research is counter some of the common narratives which you often hear from NGOs, but also in the media or in public opinion, that these groups mostly attract young, urban, unemployed men who are bent on violence. That is definitely a part of what's happening around these groups, but just looking at the cross-section of my interviewees, I think the youngest were around about 15 or 16. The oldest one was in the 60s. You have some who are unemployed, but others are university students, others are farmers, others are taxi drivers, there was priests, there are parliamentarians, there are police officers. So it's quite a broad group of different kinds of class backgrounds that are involved, age backgrounds, and it's something that's spread across the country, and by now also amongst the Timorese diaspora in Indonesia, in Ireland, in the UK, in Korea, and so on. So the groups, they're a bit difficult to kind of sort of pin down to in terms of their typology, because they do use different labels and define themselves differently, but basically it consists of martial arts groups such as BSHT, Kerasakti, Kung Fu Master, which define themselves through a particular martial art. Mostly that's something that was imported from outside of Timor, be it Kung Fu or Pencak, for example. Then there's ritual arts groups like 7-7 or Kork, which then define themselves more through kind of reinvented Timorese rituals. Then you have different veterans organizations, though a lot of the members are not per se veterans anymore, such as Sagrada Familia, CPD, RDTL, Kolimau 2000 or KLM. There's smaller gangs, which sometimes identify with martial arts groups or ritual arts groups, but sometimes are autonomous. And then you have a whole range of different other informal security groups, including one set up by the Catholic Church. But I will be focusing mostly on the first two groups, the martial arts groups and ritual arts groups. And just to kind of give a bit of context of Timorese masculinities. So in general, there's very many different kinds of cultural traditions, of course, across Timor, and these have changed over the years, and globalization, modernization, you have different kinds of influences, but generally speaking, it is it tends to be one where there is primacy given to men over women, especially in public spaces, and a gerontocratic system where there is respect for the older over the younger. There is, of course, also a very strong role played by spirituality, and which is something also that these groups tap into. And for men, traditionally has been very important to belong to different kinds of patronage networks, and these include family networks, clan networks, region-based networks, but also belonging to political parties, for example, and this is something that in part overlaps with the groups that I'm looking at. There is often a strong focus on hierarchy and respect within these networks, and also one which is then based on having a higher status through age, for example. And throughout sort of history, especially, of course, during the years of the Indonesian occupation, there was a celebration of the struggle and martiality that was linked to masculinity, and that's something that you can also see in the post-conflict situation. And then oftentimes you have, in discussions I had with a lot of the men, these notions of male hot-bloodedness, that they're easily irascible, which I think some of that is more something of a stereotype than reality, but it is something that came up quite often in the interviews. So two of the things that I want to focus on here are belonging and identity, and then the spiritual side of things, and spirituality and security. And even though the groups in the public mind and in media and amongst UN agencies, for example, are mostly seen as focusing on violence, when I talked to the members of these groups, what they highlighted was something very different. It was a lot around respect and self-respect. Unity came up time and again, or to use the name of one of these groups, which was based in Dili, peace, love, unity, and respect. And these are the kinds of things that they stressed, which is very much counter to the kind of violent image that a lot of people have of these groups. And there is definitely a partial overlap, as, for example, James Cambry's research has also shown, between membership in these groups and overlapping and augmenting and strengthening already existing networks of male belonging and patronage to a particular part of town or a particular village and to a particular region of origin, a particular kinship group, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, these are also very huge organizations with thousands or tens of thousands of members, so there's not always going to be just one story that holds true for everyone. And I did find numerous families where brothers or the father and sons would be in different groups and different organizations being present in the same village. So it's not always an overlap with these other networks of patronage and belonging. But I think these are augmented and strengthened through these groups, and there's definitely an interplay there. One of the reasons for joining these groups, beyond respect and self-respect and spirituality, which I'll come to next, is, however, also the provision of physical and spiritual security that the members sought from this. In part, especially with the martial arts groups, members would say that they wanted to learn how to defend themselves, but there's also collective security at play. For example, one of the taxi drivers in Delhi that I was interviewing was saying that if he gets into an accident with another taxi driver who's a member of some group, then he will need to have backup from his group, or otherwise it will not end well for him. So I think there's definitely that aspect of physical collective security, but also spiritual security that comes through the rituals, that comes through the magic that is invoked in these groups, that gives them amulets or is carried around without amulets, but also through scarifications and other forms of protection that I'll get to in a moment. And this is also something, the security is not just for the persons themselves and for the group themselves, but it's also something they offer to neighborhoods, they offer to companies. Sometimes that becomes borderline extortion, but also providing spiritual security by doing rituals to protect people against black magic or faith healing, or doing rituals to protect them against witchcraft. So these are kinds of security services that these groups, not just the ritual arts groups, but also the martial arts groups, provide to the community. And in the interviews, they often highlight the kinds of activities they do to support the community, and especially the Catholic Church. There is also an overlap and kind of you do find members of these groups also in the state structures, in ministries, and quite a number of the high-ranking members of some of these groups are in positions of power in the bureaucracy, and you do have them also in the parliament, especially through the Kunto party, and they also embedded in the security forces, which is something that is, of course, a matter of concern to donor governments, for example, UN agencies. The picture here, in case you're wondering, is from the new headquarters, or the palace of Kork, one of the ritual arts groups that's being constructed in Ainaro, which is quite a massive complex. And the other part I wanted to highlight then, and this picture is from a 7/7 member who's just gone through a sort of a protective ritual that I was allowed to attend in Delhi last year. So especially for the ritual arts groups, there is a highlighting of mystical rituals, of accessing magical powers that give them, the members, powers such as invisibility or being in two places at once. And a lot of these echo traditional Timorese beliefs, and it's something that you can also, when I've done interviews with ex-militia members or with ex-Volunteer members, these are the kinds of rituals and the kind of magic that was also invoked during the war against the Indonesian occupation, but also by the militias to give them protection against the enemy. And these are amalgamations of sort of indigenous approaches to ritual and protective magic and so on, with Catholicism, but also imports. And the groups are quite open about saying how they kind of pick and choose. Like one of the members, high-ranking members of Kerasakti was saying that they choose kind of the best elements of Timorese culture, Indonesian culture, and Chinese culture, and create this new mixture that kind of like updating a lot of the tradition for the 21st century. And I would kind of argue as well that it replicates some of these traditional roles that you would have had in Timorese society of the Dianine, the Matandok, and the warriors, the Aswine, into something that's more up to date and gives then these young men who are not able to access the traditional system another avenue of accessing these. And as mentioned, they also offer the spiritual protection to themselves and to others in the community. And something that I found increasingly, and which kind of parallels some of the ways in which former Volunteer members of the fallen heroes of the resistance are celebrated, is that these groups are now increasingly also building their own graves and funeral memorials. These are two on the left and the right from PSHT members, one in Mobice, the other in Mariana, and the middle is a Kork member who's being commemorated, and highlighting again sort of how these young men would not be able to get the kind of recognition in death that Volunteer members get, are able to tap into these kinds of masculine respect and adoration through membership in these groups. and I will end there. Thank you.
Silvia, tens que pôr on o som.
Ok. Ok? Ok. Estão me ouvindo? Thank you, Henry. I think that agora acho que a gente pode passar para 5 minutinhos de perguntas para serem colocadas no chat. Tem algo ali.
So Roberta would like to ask a question. Would you? Yeah.
Okay, so hello,
Hey.
good morning here. I'm in Brazil as well, so I'm so now it's nearly 6, so it's not so bad. So thank you so much for your presentation, and Harry, I'm really interested in your work because it relates a lot to what I'm trying to do. And from your presentation, so I'm interested in how actually different kinds of actors in Timor, how they understand the role of violence. And I found it quite interesting that you mentioned that for some of them, it was all about respect or peace and love and things that seem very contradictory. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on how they see the role of violence, or even what is legitimate violence, and because I mean, how does this clash sometimes with more institutional visions of violence as, you know, minimum violence to keep the order, or, you know, and to which extent the representations of what is violence or not collides with what we see, you know, as external, the gang violence, etc. So if you could elaborate a little bit more. Thank you.
Sure, and that was something I was looking more into when I was doing my first round of research in 2007 to 2009 approximately, which was also when sort of the violence, of course, was much more visible, because you had sort of standoffs between the different groups and constant fighting between them, in Dili especially and Baucau. So that was much more present in the discourses, and what I found really interesting, so I was looking at or interviewing members of these groups at the same time also interviewing former members of the militia from 1999. And even though you have men with very different backgrounds and very different political convictions and different biographies, and politically kind of on different sides of the divide, the way in which they made sense of the violence was very, very similar. And it was only 1 out of 40 interviewees during that research openly said that they had been violent, basically. The others would sort of admit to acts of violence later on, but always frame it around that it was an act of self-defense, or it was preemptive violence that had to be done because otherwise the other person would have attacked, or it was something that happened in a kind of a rush of madness, or it was a time of madness when this happened. So there was definitely a lot of distancing from the violence. And I mean, the violence still occurs between these groups, obviously, and what I found also interesting, that even though you have this rhetoric of unity within the groups, that if one of us gets attacked, then all of us will support that person in this collective security. And that's not necessarily the case, unless it's something that is so immediate that you cannot escape the violence. A lot of the group members were very happy to distance themselves from that. So, for example, I was doing interviews in one village in the Kisa district, and just a few days earlier, there had been a clash between 2 groups in the neighboring village. And in this village, where I was doing the interviews, they were like, well, it's none of our business. It was something that got out of control at a wedding. It's a personal issue. And even though it was members of my group, I didn't feel obliged in any kind of way to go in there and support them. So you have different kinds of relationships with violence. And also when I was doing some of the interviews in Dili, some of the members were also, you had some members who had a reputation for extreme violence and who had killed people in 2007 or 2008. And others would give them sort of begrudging respect, but also kind of label them as somewhat crazy. So there was a distancing from that extreme violence as well. So there wasn't really a celebration of that violence. But yes, it's contradictory and paradoxical, because then of course also they do highlight that they do have these strengths and these powers and practice their skills in fighting if need be.
Suzana agora tem uma questão. Suzana.
Hi, Henri. Well, my first question is really naive, sorry. I always had this wondering, how do people see themselves, these different groups see themselves as being really connected? I mean, it's a serious doubt I have. If all these groups constitute a web of martial arts groups, or it's just, you know, so what kind of connection do they see existing between them? And this is connected with another point, which is a very, well, the direct question of knowing in what way are they actually influencing institutional parts of Timor? How are they kind of maçons in a way that they are able to in certain situations to be together and may influence institutions in Timor. Now, a third point is more of a sensitive point for an anthropologist, which is to characterize Timor as a patriarchy. Because, you know, you say that women are not in the public space, but they are. And for me, patriarchal societies are capitalist societies like the United States, where women have serious problems on getting to higher jobs. And where, you know, the kind of masculinity of patriarchy point of view is quite clear for me. So I wonder, in this way, what I'm saying is, of course, that everything is comparable. Everything depends on the kind of comparison that you make. So I wonder if from a start saying it is a patriarchy isn't too, well, if it isn't too of a category that would make more sense to think of if you want to compare kind of modern societies between them, or instead of well, I don't know, if in terms of masculinity, which is your main point, right? If you, how would you, for instance, compare patriarchy in the United States and Timor? So, just a provocation.
Great question. So I'll start with the first one around how much do they, if I understood correctly, because I might have forgotten the question, but how much do they see themselves as kind of a more or less unified group, or how do they see other groups as well? I think there is a common sense between members of these groups that they are, and especially with the ban in 2013, that they feel that they're being unfairly treated by the government, and they're being, and what also came up a lot in the interviews was that they felt that they're being portrayed unfairly as troublemakers in media and public discourse. So you do have this kind of sense of kind of grievance and victimization that is there. And they obviously know of each other. I mean, if you go around Delhi especially, but also in other urban centers and to a degree in the countryside, the different gang markers, the different martial arts group markers, the 7/7s of the ritual arts groups are everywhere, and they do demarcate their territory, and they're very visible and want to be quite visible. And prior to the ban, they would have very visible shows of force as well, which they don't have now. But what I did find interesting is that they have very little knowledge of what the other groups stand for. So what came up oftentimes when I asked them, like, why did you join, let's say, 7/7 and not PSHT, they would highlight that they joined because of what 7/7 stands for, the ideology is, but they would not really know what the alternative is. They wouldn't know really what PSHT stands for or what KORK stands for, except that it's different and it's other. But then when you look at when I compared sort of what I was getting from the different groups, it was actually, in fact, quite similar. So you have the ritual arts groups, which don't focus on a particular martial art. The members still practice martial arts for self-defense reasons. The martial arts groups, which are not known for their rituals, also do their rituals, have the same kind of magical protection or mystical powers that the ritual arts groups do. They all highlight spirituality and Catholicism. They highlight similar values of honor and respect and self-respect and unity. So I think there are actually quite strong similarities, but still they kind of see the other groups as being ideologically different. And I think maybe kind of a parallel would be something like football teams, for example, where all football teams in a way are kind of similar, but then you would say that I support Team X and Team Y is my mortal enemy, even though they are very, very similar in how they play out their masculinities and their identities. The second question was around institutions. And that's a tricky question, or was a tricky question for me to really get any kind of real hard information on. Because on the one hand, a lot of the group members would boast about the influence they have, that they would say that John Anagushma was a member of our group, and this is the guy who inducted Maria Katiri into our group, and we have X, Y, and Z members of parliament are members of our group. But then there was also a lot of overlap between the different groups claiming a particular person, especially somebody as powerful as John Anagushma. So it's hard to vary, and for these high-ranking people themselves don't come out and say, I'm a member of PSHT or I'm a member of 7/7. So it's hard to verify that. And when it came to, I mean, I think the one to really look at is Kuntur and its links to KORK, where there are a lot of outsiders from outside of KORK and political observers say that it's clear that there's that connection. But the members of KORK themselves, when I asked them about it, they were the only ones who denied having political access. Whereas the other groups would say, yes, we don't need to set up a political party because we have all our members in CNRT and Frentilin and so on. The KORK members were the only ones who were sort of distancing themselves from that power, which kind of maybe highlighted that they do have that access that others don't. But it's something I would like to look into more, but it's a very sensitive topic, obviously. And membership of martial arts or police officers and acting FFDTL personnel in martial arts groups and ritual arts groups. And that's something where there have been attempts to crack down on that. And there's been several rounds of police officers and of members of the armed forces saying that they're no longer members and they've exited from martial arts groups. But I think you do still have those links that continue to exist there. And lastly, in terms of patriarchy, I mean, from my perspective, unfortunately, I'd say that pretty much all societies are patriarchal, but in different ways and to differing degrees. In my examination of sort of Timor-Leste and these groups, I draw mostly on sort of where I do comparisons. It's more with Indonesia, given sort of the influence of historical influence of Indonesian masculinities on these groups in terms of how they were set up, especially the martial arts groups, which draw on this legacy that goes back to the sort of Japanese Jagoism and also sort of the way in which when the Japanese Imperial Army set up self-defense groups during the occupation of the Second World War, how this then influenced the militant masculinities in the Indonesian independence war, and how that was then transplanted as part of the Indonesian nation-building project, which was patriarchal in its own Orde Baru, New Order kind of way into Timor society, but then also looking at some of the ways in which there are parallels between these groups and these networks of male belonging with places like Papua New Guinea and the rascals that we find there. I would still stand by sort of these being patriarchal structures, but I wouldn't necessarily compare them directly to the US, definitely not. But I think patriarchy is something that we have in pretty much all of our societies.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Agora, thank you, Harry. Agora a gente pode passar a palavra para Roberta. Roberta, por favor.
Okay, obrigada, Silvia. I actually prepared my presentation in English, so okay, a couple of caveats. First, for anyone who has read my first submission, my abstract was quite more ambitious than what I was able to prepare. I think, as everybody, I was quite affected by the pandemic familiar effects, so I'm really late with most of my analysis. So my original work is part of a much larger project. I mean, I've been working mostly with Mozambique for the last few years, and then more recently I decided to do kind of a comparative study with Timor-Leste. And basically the idea is to try to understand subjectivities around violence, power, and peace. So you know, this transition from a state of violent conflict to international intervention, and then what comes next. So in the case of Timor-Leste, I mean, I went there last year for a couple of months, and I did interviews with different kinds of actors, because I'm interested in, I'm coming from a debate in peace and conflict studies, peace building, and this thing called the local turn. And, you know, they have a huge debate on how internationals portray, you know, these countries that have intervention and what happens next. And there is this kind of sometimes very dichotomic perspective of local internationals. And I'm interested in the heterogeneity of local actors and experiences. So basically I spoke to all kinds of people, men, women, different generations, people who had been prisoners or people who had stayed in Dili most of the time, internationals. But for the purpose of this paper, I was just able to focus, I decided to focus on 7 women I spoke to and see their own experiences of violence, peace, and power, and how they spoke about that. So I also did something different from what I'm used to do. I usually work with more structured interviews, but I found that most of the times people just wanted to tell their stories, so I just stay there and listen, and then I asked eventually a couple of extra things. So basically it was kind of a very unstructured type of conversation. And these 7 women were from, I mean, I was mostly in Dili, but they were women from different places. There was someone from Liquiçá, Mobici, Covalima, Baucau, and also women from Dili. And also they had like different experiences. like some had stayed in Dili during the whole occupation, some had escaped to the mountains, some had been like all over the place during the occupation. And they also had different ages, so some still had the memories of the colonial times, and some like were younger. So it's just that set the stage of you know, the extent of how different the narratives were at the same time because of these different experiences. So I organized my analysis in kind of 3 broad periods where I see the narratives around violence, peace, and power. So the first is the period before the Indonesian occupation. So you have some still the Portuguese colonialism, and then that in between, you know, when you still have also kind of the brief internal conflict for independence. And while, well, 2 of the women I spoke to, they had more vivid memories about this period. And I find it interesting to include it here because, I mean, obviously, I think it's common sense that colonialism is violent. But I think the thing with violence is that experience relates a lot to the scale. And since what came after, you know, the Indonesian occupation was so brutal, and perhaps because, you know, this period was so far away, the discussion around violence in this period seemed a bit more like mild in the sense. And in the case of 2 of the women I spoke to, so they were like teenagers in the 70s. So around 75, one of them was 16, the other was 14. And they were also from a kind of a privileged situation. One of the parents was like a doctor, the other was a chef de suco. So even though they lived during the Portuguese time, they were still in a privileged position. But what I found interesting about their narratives was actually a strong dimension of power and empowerment, because they were very much engaged in the political parties and the origin of the Fretilin. So they were very politically engaged at this time. So even though they were quite young, they joined the OPMT, the organization of Timorese women, then the National Students Union, the UNIT team. So when they speak about this period, they actually have a strong sense of a moment of conscientization. So they hear about Fretilin on the radio and the whole discourse about the need for national liberation, revolution, etc. And also at the time, one of them had this opportunity to join a trip organized by Fretilin to Aileu, because there was this really a big effort to promote conscientization. And so they went there to see, with lots of other young kids, to see the situation of the other people in the country. And they worked in this orphanage. So according to one of them, this was kind of a wake-up moment. Okay, we really need some big change here. So there was this strong sense of empowerment in this narrative. Of course, again, experiences are very different. So the 3rd woman that had a memory of this time actually had a very different experience of this period before the Indonesian occupation, because she actually, during the fight between UDT and Fretilin, her mom there was a stray bullet and her mom got injured. So she had to start escaping right away, even before the Indonesians came in. So it was a narrative that focused mostly on the situation of I would say even kind of desperation, as she was very young and wasn't engaged in this parallel movement of, you know, hopes for a different future to come. So the second phase I analyze, of course, is the period of Indonesian occupation. And all of these women had memories of this period. One of them was a little bit younger. She was born during this time, but most of them were like older women. So they had memories since the 70s of this period. And what came out from these conversations but what I would like to highlight here is actually what seems to me a dialectical relationship between suffering and violence and power at the same time. So on the one hand, they tell all the stories about what they went through, and there are kind of 4 types of broad violence that most of them experience. I mean, the first one was displacement in different ways. Some of them had lived in the mountains for a few years. One of them actually stayed in Dili during the whole time, but at some point also had to escape. And so all of them actually, in a way or another, they went through this situation of displacement, and with all the other problems related to that. Then the second issue, or the second expression of violence, was the constant state of surveillance and persecution, which I think is perhaps the more abstract thing, but it was one of the worst that I picked up in the narratives, because it was constant, this constant fear, this constant kind of pressure. And this was related to the third type of violence, which was, well, many of them were imprisoned, tortured, and raped. So this constant state of fear, surveillance, and persecution was also related to the effects of this kind of third broad type of violence. And the fourth type of violence was forced marriage. One of them actually had been married to Indonesian soldiers twice. So this is just like the broad types of experiences that it had been through. And this was brutal. I won't get into details, but the other side of this, which I found interesting, and I was actually hoping to find during our conversations, that even in these circumstances, that there was actually a lot of situations that show different kinds of power or feeling of empowerment during this whole period. So for starters, some of them who were in the mountains, they were really focusing on the social life and organization during that period. So they spoke a lot about how they were organized, how the role of the collective. They noticed that they had like food, they had natural medicine, and everything was, one of them even mentioned that it was too cheerful up there to even think of surrendering. So this part of being part of a collective body, united by a common goal, which was, achieve independence, was so strong that really give them momentum to keep going and keep fighting. So linked to that, I think another issue that gave them a lot of strength was the hope that was that they got also through the strong network of communication. So they were constantly getting informed by the guerrillas, by the fighters. They always had informations, and when they were in the mountains, and like messages such as we are fish and you are the water, so we depend on you. And it was something that really gave them impetus again to keep going and keep struggling. In some cases, and I think this was also a kind of a striking thing, that even in moments of strong subjugation, there were many instances when you see these women trying to make power out of a situation of suffering and subjugation. I think this is the case particularly when one of them was married to this Indonesian soldier. So I know it was very common there. So they used this situation sometimes as a cover, as a shield, to even provide more help to the families, or to even provide more food to the guerrilla fighters. So they use the situation that they're forced to be in to do something out of it. And the other aspect that I think was really important when it comes to power during this period was the role of faith and religion. It came out strongly in at least two of the conversations. So one of these women, for example, had joined the Catholic Church, a youth group of the Catholic Church. And it was the only place where she would feel like free to speak about what was going on. And this was also kind of an important pillar to, help her keep moving and keep going during that period. But also sometimes even in a more informal tone, like, the trust in God and trust that everything, you know, had a purpose or was coming to an end at some point. So it also helped the idea of, you know, the sense of feeling enough power to keep moving. So when it comes to the referendum and independence and afterwards, then of course there is a shift to experiences of peace and power. I was actually also interested to see discourses about violence during peace. So, but interestingly enough, there was barely any mention of it. Even sometimes they would mention something about the martial arts group, but that's it. You know, again, I think this reflects the idea of the scale. When you have such a strong kind of violence during some time, what comes next? It's different. Of course, it's different in nature, but it's not that much highlighted in the speeches. But what I find interesting is that, well, first of all, peace, the idea of peace is related to a deep sense of freedom and individual empowerment. So in many cases, women really stress the fact that finally now I can think of myself and what I want to do with my life, and not only escape or take care of my family. So there are opportunities. There's one of them engaged in a lot of trainings from international organizations and NGOs. So there is this obvious sense of freedom. Then there's the second thing that comes out is the idea of peace, of course, related to national union. Okay, we made it, we won, and we finally got independence, and this is a good thing, and we did it together, and we're all part of it somehow. But then that's the moment when sometimes the narrative like would come to an end, and then it would prompt like a little bit more questions. And that's when the idea of national union started to become a little bit more complex and even fragmented. So all of a sudden you realize that there is also a perception that the benefits were not equally distributed. And I think in the case of women, this is particularly the case because the issue of lack of recognition was really strong. So on the one hand, they wanted to, to praise the leaders. And if you would ask more about politics, they would still know, I mean, they're the national leaders. They were fundamental, for the situation of freedom that we have today. But at the same time, they would also say, okay, like things like reconciliation, it came as a shock to many of them, especially those who went through so much suffering as prisoners. Some of them, for example, had kids with Indonesians, so they feel like there was a lack of recognition on this as well. So they don't have the treatment of their kids or their situation as a special category. So just to sum up, I mean, I think during peace times, I mean, if you think about power during these three periods, it's like you have a momentum during the until 75, when you have these high hopes for something new to come up. Then you have a period of extreme brutality, but then also different ways to find a sense of empowerment during this period. And when peace finally comes, and when you say, okay, now we're all empowered, I actually start to see the problems with this fragmentation, including of the idea of who gains what and what kind of unity we have. So yes, this is my pre-analysis of what I have so far. So thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Questions? I think that I can. Thank you, Roberta. Please, I have a question. Do you see difference between the women point of view in relation of the masculine point of view in terms of the concepts of peace and violence?
Okay, so I'm still working, as I said, I'm still working on the interviews. I mean, I did transcribe some of the conversations I had with men. I think I still need to grasp a little bit more the peace and violence thing. But one thing that I noticed that is different so far is the thing of recognition. So especially during peace times, it's an issue that was much more strong in the case of women. because of, I would say, the different experiences that they had with violence. So it's something that didn't come up so far as much in the conversation with most of the men, including those who have been through a lot. Perhaps this idea of, I mean, I think I felt a little bit less with the conversations with men, this thing of fragmentation, you know, of the piece. So there was perhaps more focus on the, okay, we won aspect of the situation. And in terms of violence, that's the thing for me, is that's why I'm quite interested in the discussion from Harry, because I find it a little bit difficult to explore this, especially in peacetime. I think there is a tendency to not get there, you know, and just focus on the positives. So you have to kind of dig in and make more questions to try to get a sense of the other issues during peace times. So I think there is an acknowledgement, and that's the general, regardless of, you know, men and women I spoke to, that even if there's violence today, there's domestic violence, there's, you know, martial arts groups, and that's the thing. But this is different, and so there's not a big thing there, at least as it comes in the narratives. So perhaps that's the main difference in terms of the peace discourse, the lack of recognition on the one hand, but otherwise, and which of course also, and also the kind of a sense of security, perhaps, of the idea of feeling safe. Some women mention, maybe because of, you know, especially some young women actually, and that's also a thing that I still have to analyze, this generational gap. So the young people who haven't lived exactly through the occupation, they have a more refined sense of this discussion on violence during peace times. So yeah, but I still have to dig into that.
Thank you. Henry, please.
Yeah, I have a question that I think, Roberto, you maybe already partially answered. I was wondering, so after independence, a lot of Timorese women's organizations and also international NGOs, the UN, the governments have been putting a lot of efforts into raising awareness around domestic violence and working on preventing domestic violence, responding to domestic violence. I'm just wondering about sort of the kind of the tension between violence in the private sphere compared to the kind of the big V violence in the public sphere that they were mentioning. What kind of differences do you see there in that narrative? Maybe especially amongst some of the younger respondents.
Yeah, so that was actually what I was interested in, but I found it hard. I mean, it was my first time in Timor, and again, it's been a year and a half or so that I'm working with Timor, so it's I would very much like to go back and dig a little bit more. But what I found is that I think most of the women I spoke to were from this, I mean, were a bit older, so they were children or teens during the late 70s. And so they when they spoke about like domestic violence, it's like, okay, it happens, but they didn't refer to their own experiences. Mostly they had the opportunity to restart a family, get married again. Some had other children. So, but they would refer to, okay, there's still a lot of women going through this and that. So they know it's out there, but I didn't get stories about it. And even when I spoke to younger women, they didn't mention anything on their own like that of people that they knew or their own experiences on this. And when it comes to the period of Indonesian occupation, I mean, I think perhaps the most brutal part of it is that there was no clear separation between the private and public for women, especially. So especially when you think about cases of forced marriage, etc. So it's something that I would expect, you know, maybe to analyze, okay, so what's the difference next? I mean, there's the obvious one that now they can have a private life. So I think this is just big enough for those who've been through the period of occupation. And maybe that's why it's a bit difficult to to discuss this in the present moment. Mostly of what I've heard was through the work of NGOs like, I know, ACBIT and people who are working with this, or even some internationals working with women, you know, but not from the narratives of the people I spoke with. So it's something I really have to dig in.
Thanks.
Thank you, Roberta. I don't know if it is possible to present the video related to the presentations of Alexandre Bueno and Regina Brito.
Junior will do it for us.
Ok. Thank you, Júnior. Obrigado, Júnior.
Bom dia a todos, boa tarde, boa noite, dependendo de onde você estiver neste momento, né, no planeta. Muito prazer, meu nome é Alexandre, eu junto com a professora Regina Pires de Brito aqui somos da Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie do Brasil, né, de São Paulo, do Brasil. E vamos apresentar então hoje aqui o nosso trabalho intitulado Formas de Vida Timor-Leste, Representações Sociais e Culturais em Discursos Timorenses. Por conta do pouco tempo que temos disponível para fazer a apresentação e também para não atrapalharmos os demais participantes aqui da sessão, optamos então por eu fazer essa apresentação, mas a professora Regina Brito está aqui presente conosco também. Bom, nós temos aqui uma ideia inicial de observar como é que os discursos de Timor-Leste são produzidos a partir de algumas decorrências históricas, como, por exemplo, os fluxos externos, né, como a colonização e a neocolonização relativa, por exemplo, tanto ao período indonésio, como também ao momento atual de globalização, que envolve ali relações de poder entre diferentes países, não é? E também pensando que, historicamente, houve ali sempre sucessivas tentativas de sujeição da população timorense e, consequentemente, da cultura timorense. Nós pensamos, então, como é que, ainda assim, com todas essas interferências externas, digamos assim, houve uma manutenção evidente da diversidade social, cultural e linguística timorense, não é? E mesmo com essas tensões geracionais que existem a partir dessa diversidade. Então, um dos nossos objetivos aqui, no nosso trabalho, é de pensar na relação de Timor-Leste com digamos, este outro elemento hoje externo ou exterior à cultura timorense, que é o universo lusófono como um todo, não é? E nós daqui a pouco vamos trazer aqui uma definição de lusofonia que defendemos e a qual nos alinhamos, não é? Mas é pensar, sobretudo, aqui como é que a Timor-Leste se relaciona com esse universo lusófono a partir justamente dessas suas características plurilinguísticas, pluriculturais e plurissociais, não é? Por outro lado, um outro objetivo que nós temos aqui hoje, se der tempo, é refletir sobre uma proposta de entendimento da sociedade timorense a partir de diferentes formas de vida, né, que é um conceito trabalhado dentro da semiótica discursiva, não é? Para falar um pouco sobre essas formas de vida típicas da cultura local timorense. Bom, então, rapidamente, pensando aqui esse primeiro objetivo da relação entre Timor-Leste e a lusofonia, nós temos aqui uma proposta teórica ainda sendo melhor articulada, melhor desenvolvida, né? E nós temos aqui outros trabalhos em andamento para discutir um pouco mais esse conceito de semiótica, relacionado ali com os círculos da lusofonia também, enfim. Né? Mas, basicamente, a semiosfera ela é um campo no qual os textos são produzidos e por meio do qual vão circular, não é? E, além disso, ele é um conceito que, segundo Lotman, é um pressuposto necessário para entendermos ali como é que uma cultura ela existe e o modo pelo qual ela também se autodescreve em seus textos. Então, é um pouco isso que nós vamos ver aqui hoje. Além disso, é por meio da semiosfera que uma cultura, então, vai fazer fronteira com outras culturas, ou seja, com outras semiosferas. E aí, então, nós vamos ter ali um centro, né, dessa semiosfera, como uma esfera mesmo, que vai ser, digamos, uma normatividade dentro de uma determinada cultura, enquanto que nos espaços mais periféricos, né, afastados desse centro, nós teremos ali, então, espaços em que essa fronteira será caracterizada como um lugar de trocas culturais, não é? Que vão ocorrer, então, dentro dessas fronteiras. Além disso, nós entendemos aqui que no caso que vamos observar aqui hoje, nós temos então um encontro de pelo menos duas semiosferas, não é? Uma de Timor-Leste, menor, e uma que nós chamamos de lusofonia, que, digamos, é esse sentimento de pertencimento a uma determinada cultura supranacional, como é no caso da lusofonia, não é? E para entendermos um pouco mais digamos, esses processos de trocas culturais, nós também aqui recorremos a dois conceitos propostos por esses autores, né, Fontanilles e Berberg, num livro chamado Atenção e Significação, em que eles vão falar, então, que o sentido ele é operado por dois operadores, ele é operado por dois conceitos, né? De um lado a mistura e de outro a triagem, ou seja, um regime que é baseado ali na mestiçagem, na articulação e conjunção de elementos contrários, não é? Enquanto que, por outro lado, a triagem se define como uma operação que vai excluir e separar ali determinados elementos, muitas vezes visando, por exemplo, a uma ideia de uma pureza cultural, por exemplo, entre outras coisas. Então, nós podemos dizer que existem culturas que são baseadas ali em processos de mistura e culturas baseadas também em processos de triagem. Bom, trouxemos aqui, então, um conceito de lusofonia do professor Moisés Martins, da Universidade de Braga, em que ele diz o seguinte: a lusofonia só poderá entender-se como espaço de cultura. E como espaço de cultura, a lusofonia não pode deixar de nos remeter para aquilo que podemos chamar o indicador fundamental da realidade antropológica, ou seja, para o indicador de humanização, que é o território imaginário de paisagens, tradições e língua, que da lusofonia se reclama e que é, enfim, o território dos arquétipos culturais, um consciente coletivo lusófono, um fundo mítico de que se alimentam os sonhos. E é justamente pensando, digamos, nesse fundo mítico, que nós vamos pensar nessa relação da cultura timorense com a lusofonia, por meio justamente desse território imaginário de paisagens, tradições e língua, não é? Então, como é que isso, como é que é operada essa troca cultural? Bom, então nós pensamos que existe em Timor-Leste, assim como deve existir em outros países pertencentes à lusofonia, não é? Tensões entre o exterior e a organização interna dessa semiosfera, no caso timorense, não é? Que seria representado, por um lado, por uma tradição cultural local, por exemplo, não é? Claro que poderíamos pensar aqui em outras opções no momento, mas como ainda estamos numa etapa inicial dessa nossa pesquisa, nós estamos pensando sobretudo aqui nas tradições culturais, não é? Então, como é que essa, digamos, tensão entre o exterior e o interior de uma dada cultura, ela pode se resolver, não é? Como é que pode ser feita, digamos, uma síntese, se pensarmos sobretudo ali que está presente, ou fortemente presente, a língua do colonizador, não é? Que vai, então, de alguma forma, inicialmente, passar uma ideia de que ele vai, de alguma forma, apagar esses elementos culturais existentes ali numa determinada localidade, não é? O que nós podemos observar, por meio do exemplo que nós trouxemos aqui hoje, né, em relação aos mitos locais, é que há uma espécie, sim, de estratégia de resistência local, e não só isso, mas também de uma ampliação da difusão desses elementos locais para outros espaços de circulação de textos e de discursos. Então, eu trouxemos aqui o mito de surgimento da ilha de Timor-Leste, né, que eu não vou ficar aqui me detendo em análises pormenorizadas, mas ele digamos, eu trouxe ele aqui como um exemplo, um bloco assim total, não é? Para que nós justamente possamos pensar que esse tipo de texto ele vai, digamos, mostrar que, ao invés, digamos, de um apagamento da cultura local, como, por exemplo, ocorreu no Brasil com as populações originárias aqui, né, os povos indígenas, ou parte dos povos indígenas, não é? No Timor-Leste aconteceu de uma maneira um pouco diferente, não é? Porque não houve esse apagamento da cultura local por conta da força da presença do colonizador no passado, não é? O que ocorre hoje, né, já há alguns anos, é justamente o uso da língua do colonizador, não para simplesmente reforçar os valores que o colonizador apresenta e muitas vezes impõe, mas sim de usar essa língua do colonizador para tentar manter vivo ali o que é esse mito local, esse mito da origem, assim como outros mitos existentes dentro da cultura timorense. E não só apenas manter vivo esse mito, não é? Essa tradição local, mas também poder amplificá-la, ou seja, fazer com que, a partir do momento, então, que, ao invés de ser apreendido pela língua do colonizador, a cultura timorense apreende essa língua para poder utilizá-la a seu favor, ele faz com que, então, os seus textos, que seria de uma cultura local, passem a circular em outras esferas dessa sua, digamos, produção originária, ou seja, passe a circular igualmente dentro desse universo lusófono. Desse modo, uma significação local ela é rearticulada, então, o quê? Como uma outra língua que faz parte oficialmente da própria semiosfera timorense. Então, o que nós temos aqui é o quê? Uma mistura entre o local e o global, não é? Entre a tradição, que vem do conteúdo do mito de origem timorense, no caso do exemplo que escolhemos, mas que também tem consequências globais, ou seja, a partir da língua do ex-colonizador português, essa cultura ela se amplifica, então, dentro desse universo lusófono. Em relação aqui às formas de vida, eu vou passar aqui rapidamente, mas a ideia é que ela é o quê? Uma forma de vida ela é composta por signos, textos, objetos e práticas que vão carregar o quê? Valores e princípios, não é? E que vão se manifestar tanto em atitudes como em expressões simbólicas, estados afetivos e posições de enunciação. Desse modo, nós podemos observar formas de vida desde comportamentos, não é, padronizados, até mesmo em discursos literários, como é o caso aqui do que nós escolhemos, que foi, então, analisar aqui fragmentos do romance do Luiz Cardoso, o primeiro romance do Luiz Cardoso, chamado Crônica de uma Travessia, a época de Aidik Funan, não é? Então, a nossa ideia aqui é de pensar que, focando sobretudo no narrador, no caso, não é? Nós observamos que ele vai, digamos, tal como um sujeito camaleão, circular por diferentes espaços sociais, culturais e geográficos de Timor-Leste e na própria lusofonia, né, no caso de Portugal. Então ele inicia ali o seu percurso, contando ali a sua história, em Dari, né, que é uma cidade próxima de Dili, passa pela própria capital e chega, por fim, em Portugal, não é? E eu fazendo um rápido resumo do romance, não é? Então ele vai também circular ali por esferas religiosas e científicas, né? Então ele mostra que ele parte de um projeto de padre para se chegar até o quê? A um estudante em Portugal, né? Um estudante de agronomia. E esse narrador, ele mostra, né? Ele não precisa citar isso, mas ele mostra, pelo que ele mostra, ele apresenta de comportamentos, por exemplo, que ele recusa ali o quê? Uma assimilação completa a essa cultura do colonizador, né? Essa cultura do português. Mas ele sabe, ao mesmo tempo, aproveitar o que o outro, não é, tem a oferecer a ele em termos de vantagens em relação a conhecimentos socialmente prestigiados e que podem oferecer a ele uma ascensão social. Então, nesse caso, entendemos que esse, digamos, narrador, que nós intitulamos ali como essa forma de vida, né, de um nômade mestiço, ele vai articular ali oposições entre o antigo e o moderno, assim como entre o local e o global, não é? E além disso, além dessas articulações em termos de conteúdo, ele vai também fazer um trabalho ali de mestiçagem, assim como ele faz no conteúdo, né? Mas ele também faz o quê? No plano de expressão das línguas, não é? Como nesse seguinte trecho: "Rá em fila, disse Marimal, olhando para o descampado e depois para o firmamento em busca de uma estrela orientadora. Sem falar conosco, descalçou as botas, despiu a roupa e ficou completamente nu. Depois, voltou a vestir tudo de novo, mas às avessas, tal como a natureza, como forma de encontrar o caminho de retorno." Aqui, Rá em fila é uma tradição, faz parte, digamos, de uma tradição religiosa timorense, e que o narrador narra, não é, o amigo dele realizando essa prática já no espaço em Portugal. Então, dessa forma, nós temos ali digamos, uma coexistência de elementos contrários, o que seriam inicialmente elementos contrários, não é? Só que essa forma de vida, não é, dessa ideia de uma mestiçagem que circula por diferentes espaços, ela também vai se projetar no próprio enunciado, ou seja, no próprio romance. E isso acontece quando? Quando, por exemplo, aparecem justamente essas expressões de palavras em téton. Então, isso não significa que o narrador esteja excluindo o leitor, o seu enunciatário, desse universo ao qual ele pertence, né, do qual ele se originou, né, e ao qual ele não se recusa. Então, o que ele faz, digamos, é um procedimento de tradução, né, ou seja, sempre que nesse romance aparecem ali termos relacionados ali ao tétum, ele puxa uma tradução, não é, para explicar para nós, né, os Malay, o que significam essas palavras, né? Ou seja, então ele mesmo, como um enunciador desse discurso, não considera o outro, o enunciatário, como um invasor, mas sim ao contrário. Ele considera esse enunciatário como alguém próximo dele, não é? Ou seja, alguém que é convidado, então, a compartilhar das construções dos sentidos da história, da cultura e da sociedade timorense, por meio do entendimento do que está sendo dito. E é dessa forma que também ele se aproxima de uma ideia de lusofonia, em que apresentamos, então, esses elementos, essas variedades, não é? Essa diversidade que vai construir ali uma ideia de unidade. Desse modo, nós concluímos que Timor-Leste ele é reflexo do cruzamento de diferentes culturas, né, historicamente constituídas, e também de tradições e costumes formulados, não é, historicamente, mas também de maneira contemporânea. Os diferentes discursos eles se chocam e vão criar tensões, mas também eles podem se anular e se solidarizar, não é? Que é isso que nós observamos aqui, sobretudo com Luiz Cardoso. Então, nós entendemos que esse espaço discursivo timorense é um lugar propício para se observar rearticulações, esperadas ou não, de modos de circulação de novos e velhos sentidos. Em trabalhos futuros, como nós já falamos, né, esperamos ampliar e aprofundar as questões que foram, então, muito rapidamente postas aqui. Tá? Muito obrigado a todos pela atenção e espero reencontrar a todos um dia presencialmente em um próximo evento. Muito obrigado.
So I would then suggest that we make the break now. And if anyone wants to watch the video, it is easier that you do it in your own computer using the link that Lucy has shared with us. And then we come back at 11 with the second session, right? Is that okay for everyone, yeah? Let's do it. Okay. So, Mika, the first paper will be presented by Mika, okay? In the second session, right?
Nós faremos, então, um pequeno intervalo agora. Até às 11 horas retomaremos a segunda sessão e o primeiro apresentador vai ser Mika.
Okay. See you soon. Hi, everyone. Are you there, Mika? Mika, are you there?
Yes, I am.
So will you turn the video on? Yeah.
Okay, yes, I'm.
So here we are. This is the second session of this panel. We'll have Sylvia. The first presenter will be Mika. The second one will be Sylvia, and the third one will be Fernando Ximenes. So each presenter will have 15 minutes plus 5 of discussion. This time I will be chairing the session, and we'll be strict with the time. So in the end of the session, we will have anyway another 10 minutes, say, for discussion. So the 5 minutes after each paper will be for direct questions, right? So, Mika, you can start.
Thank you, Mana Susana, and the conveners, Mauricio, and Junior, and I forgot the name, I'm sorry. But first of all, I would like to apologize, Mana Susana, especially, that I was not able to send my paper or my PowerPoint presentations earlier. That's completely my fault. I was not ready. But I managed to prepare my PowerPoint presentation so that I'm able to present or share with many of you who are in this group. This paper, how can I share this? Sorry, I'm quite new to this. Okay, I think I have. Can you see my? You can see my PowerPoint slide. I cannot hear you.
Yes, we can see it. You can even.
Sorry, you can go to the slideshow now if you want and put it as a full screen if you prefer, or you can just leave it like that.
This is what I have here on my screen. Can you see? So I can start.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can hear you. So this presentation of mine is about China's COVID-19 diplomacy in Timor-Leste. This is part of my wider research interest on understanding China in Timor-Leste. Part of my PhD thesis, which I'm trying to finalize it. I work on China-Timor-Leste relation. This COVID-19 diplomacy or things about COVID, I did not cover in my thesis, but because this is part of China's engagement, I tried to have this research. Maybe in the future I will publish part of my book. In this presentation, before I move forward, I will try to share with you the structure of the presentation today. First, I will talk about the background context, and as I use this analytical framework of soft power to analyze China's COVID diplomacy in Timor-Leste, then I will present or I'll talk about the concept of soft power. And then I'll move to China's COVID-19 diplomacy in Timor-Leste and what is the implication of China's diplomacy in Timor-Leste so far. And I consider this still as an ongoing research, so I will expect that many of you will provide inputs to enrich when I write this into the paper.
Mika, let me suggest you something. Just go to the slideshow.
Yes.
Up, yeah, and try to put it as a full screen presentation. It would be better for us to read.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, much better. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm still new with this one. Okay, let me start. This paper, in terms of the context, as you all know that the world is struck by this COVID-19 pandemic, and it has ravaged the world and threatened both economic and human security particularly, while most countries look inward in terms of providing assistance to its own citizens. China, on the other hand, has gone beyond its borders, stepping up to not only the hard-hit countries, but also less affected nations, including Timor-Leste, to tackle the infectious disease through different engagement. Having said that, this does not mean that Timor-Leste's COVID-19 response only comes from China. There are other countries too, including international organizations, have been providing support to Timor-Leste since February or since early this year. China's response, including providing medical aid and also conducted a public relations to raise the awareness about this pandemic. And China's COVID-19 related activities in Timor-Leste can be considered as a significant effort, and so far well perceived by both Timor-Leste government and also its people. Oh my God, how do I move these slides?
Use your PowerPoint. You move in your own PowerPoint, okay? And you show
I
up in the screen.
Yeah, so my main argument for this paper is that I argue that China's COVID-19 response to Timor-Leste is undoubtedly a gesture of goodwill in time of unprecedented crisis. However, its engagement also part of China's foreign policy strategy, and I consider it as a soft power to promote its self-image, reputation, and representation as a benevolent frontliner and responsible great power that is capable of filling the void in time of great need. And such diplomacy will also further strengthen its presence in Timor-Leste. So before I move forward, I would like to talk about the concept of soft power itself. Before that, as we know that power, according to Joseph Nye, defined as the ability to get the outcomes as what one wants. Since the concept of soft power was introduced by Joseph Nye in the 80s, this has been has been used widely by policymakers, by practitioners, but also an academic. And this has been used as an important tool to analyze how states and lately, I mean, China in particular has been used as, when I say China, the government has been used as its foreign policy tool to engage with other countries. However, this concept of soft power, there's no definition. There's no shared definition among the scholars. Nonetheless, Joseph Nye managed to define soft power as the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion payment. And it also defines further as the ability to affect others through cooperative means of framing the agenda, persuading and eliciting positive attraction in order to obtain preferred outcomes. This is in comparison to hard power. He defines as the ability to coerce grows out of a country's military and economic. And according to Nye, soft power arises from the attractiveness of a country's culture, political ideas, and policies. For the purpose of this paper, however, I found that Nye's concept of attractiveness has a limitation. It's a bit unclear, and it has difficulty in defining power alternative as category of analysis. So maybe it works in other countries. For example, in the US, thinks that, for example, in terms of culture, considered as a powerful tool to convince others. But I think for these cases of a COVID-19 diplomacy, I see that as having a limitation to use it as analytical tool to analyze how China engages in this case. And I adopt Todd Hall's perspective in terms of how it's used soft power as analytical tool. And he argued that in terms of analytical tool, should look into these three categories, which is institutional power, reputational power, and representational power. And he defines institutional power, according to Barnett and Dole, as constitute actors exercising control over others indirectly through institutions. As for reputational power, particularly defined as a reputation of, for example, a country that has economically successful and also can provide state with specific forms of influence, particularly given their some positive types of reputation. And about the representational power, sometimes this definition or this concept overlap with the reputational power. So in a way, how states promote certain image, but these two concepts are not the same. Sometimes people tend to use interchangeably, but these two concepts not the same. So this is the concept of soft power that I tried to use from Todd Hall's perspective. Before moving forward, I share with you in terms of Timor-Leste's COVID-19 outlook, and this information I retrieved as of September 7th. As you know, that Timor-Leste's first case of COVID-19 was confirmed on in March 21st, last confirmed. So this is an old data, but sorry, all calendar. But total recorded confirmed cases as of September 7, we have 27, and all are important cases, no community transmission yet. And so far we have 25 people recovered, only 2 are still in hospital, in isolation. And thank God, as of today, we still haven't had someone died of COVID-19. This we compared to, this is a slideshow on the daily cases in Timor-Leste. The peak one was in April. Between 11 and 18, we reached a higher number. But in terms of Timor-Leste's experience of COVID-affected cases, it's way too small compared to other countries. And in terms of the outlook of the world of COVID-19 today, as you can see, as of yesterday, the coronavirus cases have registered 27 million of people, of cases confirmed, and over 895,000 people died already. And thank God, due to, I think, medical facilities, especially in developed countries, we have 19 million and a half people recovered. And on this other slide, you can see how this is the daily cases of worldwide report. Okay, what is the China's COVID diplomacy in Timor-Leste? In my brief research that I've conducted since 2 months ago, I observed that.
Let me just tell you, we only have 2 or 3 minutes left, all right?
Oh. Okay, I'll be very quickly. So China started to engage in providing support in February. So far, China has been focusing on providing foreign aid and also conducted public research. These are the 2 main activities that China engaged in its diplomacy, its COVID-19 diplomacy. So in terms of the actor who's who in providing this, engaged in COVID diplomacy, these are the Chinese government, private citizens like Jack Ma and the Alibaba Foundation, but also China state-owned enterprises. And China claimed as the first country to provide response. And so far, I think China has been, can be considered as a significant player in Timor-Leste's COVID-19 outbreak. But as I mentioned earlier, that having said that, it does not mean that China was or has been the only one. We have countries like Australia, United States, New Zealand, European Union, UN agencies, particularly WHO, UNFPA and UNDP. And Australia has been considered the biggest player among international donors of Timor-Leste, such as Menzies School of Research. This research center has been very helpful for Timor-Leste in terms of confirmed cases when we have tests about COVID-19. So far, what in terms of in-kind contribution that China provide, among others, the medical supplies, medical equipment, temperature control, what they call the personal protection equipment, ventilators, masks. Among all these suppliers, masks are the biggest one. I think over 30,000 masks has been distributed to Timor-Leste, but mainly the way China provides support to government, it's a number of line ministers has received this mask from Chinese embassy in Timor-Leste. And also China has pledged that more assistance will come, including providing anti-coronavirus vaccine when it's ready. So this is still ongoing support as long as we are still experiencing this COVID-19. And apart from providing aid like equipment, China also conducted public outreach about its positive experience through writing articles, interviews with provide interview to local newspapers and share information through Facebook. I think Chinese embassy this started last year to this year is very active in social media, especially Facebook, and also organized teleconference meeting with Timor-Leste government officials. It also advises its citizens, the Chinese migrants in Timor-Leste especially, to obey or to follow the Timor-Leste's government's procedures, OWS procedures in terms of how to protect from COVID spreading. And in terms of the way China provide its public outreach, I think compared to the past, China is more active now, has been using different kinds of communication, as I mentioned earlier. So these are some of the activities of what China has provided. I extracted these images from Chinese embassy's Facebook. Well, when we talk about the ethics of using other people's images, I wrote to the embassy asking permission if I can use their images. I heard from them. I'm just using this one in case any problem from them, then I'll be responsible for this. But this I extracted mainly from Chinese embassy's website, also Facebook page. So in terms of the way Timor-Leste view of China's COVID-19 engagement, what I observed that China's assistance has been well received by both government of Timor-Leste and its people. As you see, first arrival of this Jack Ma and Alibaba's assistance, many people praise. We can see the positive comments in the Facebook, and also interview by local media of a couple of people about how they feel that they have someone come and help. And especially for government of Timor-Leste, they perceive that China's engagements as complementary to other donors' contribution. I think Timor-Leste is in need in this situation, given its medical facilities that are still very limited. Having this support, they consider as complementary to other efforts.
Mika, just to remind you that, well, your time is off, but we can give you another 2 or 3 minutes
Okay.
so that people will have the opportunity to make questions yet, right?
Thank you. In terms of the implication of what China's engagement in Timor-Leste, I see that China's China's COVID-19 is not only a disaster, but also a moment of opportunity for China to present itself as a savior due to its widely engagement, not only in Timor-Leste, but also to developed countries, but also to further influence and to strengthen its foothold in Timor-Leste. And China's COVID-19 response, I see it has a political touch, as I can see that from Jack Ma's and Alibaba's support to those countries providing medical equipment, only to countries that recognize China's One China policy. Those countries that has leaning towards Taiwan did not receive support from this organization. But also I see that this has been used as a stage for competing among major players. I can see that in Timor-Leste, for example, as we know that China and the US are the old rivals, especially. And when China stepped in, before that, I think US has been focusing on its internal needs. But when China was quite active in providing support, immediately the US stepped in from providing, I think, around 1 million for this COVID-19 response to Timor-Leste. And also has been used as a stage to promote China's institutional reputation through both aid, assistance, and public discourse. I think this situation, as you know, that maybe in Timor-Leste, China's assistance has been well received or well regarded by both the government and by the people. But in other countries, for example, like the US or in other countries, has been criticizing the way China portrayed the way it has been criticized China's COVID-19 response. But China's diplomat has been very active, very fiercely campaign and tried to protect China's image, and even has the way China diplomat play its role in terms of promoting and protecting China's image that we consider using this war diplomacy. And also the other implication, I see this as a way to promote further Beijing's foreign policy regarding its bid for rights, as opposed to the view of China's rights as a threat. So I come to the conclusion. So based on that information that I provided earlier, I see that China's response to Timor-Leste so far has not only come from China, but also from other countries, including international organizations. Viewing from alternative sources of influence, using Todd Hall's analytical tool in terms of reputational and representational power, I can see that China's COVID diplomacy in Timor-Leste quite successful, given its engagement so far, and it has said that it will continue its support to the country, and I think this will be, we will have perhaps a positive image in the future. I think that's all my presentation. I have some selected references here I share with you. Yeah, these are the things. I'm sorry, I was not prepared. I think I have this problem of block of using, my first time using Zoom to present.
It's been perfect, Mika. Thank you so much. We'll now have some for questions then for these wonderful, many things for sure are in our minds and questions for Mika. So you can please tell us using the chat that you want to make a question, but it's just to put your microphone on. Nadine?
Yeah, hello, hey. So, hello Mika, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It is very interesting. I've also been working a little bit on this area on the presence of China through COVID in Timor-Leste. And I'm wondering, what is your opinion on the role of China in comparison to other international regions in Timor-Leste? Like, what is the benefit of China in being there as a counterpart to the other regional organizations, international organizations, which are also like aiding the country to fight the virus?
So I couldn't hear the last part.
Sorry, wait. Hear me that like this. I think my microphone doesn't work very well. Can you hear me? Hello?
I could hardly hear.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes,
it's better.
Much better.
Good, good. So yeah, I was wondering what your opinion is on the foreign presence, like the counterpart China gives to other international organizations in Timor-Leste in fighting the virus. Like if it's all about a soft power diplomacy, if it's all about representation of their own service of their own country, like you presented with China, and what the actual benefit is in doing that in Timor-Leste, like what the country's a case study, what you can take out of that.
Thank you, Nadine. This is not the first time that China provides its medical assistance to Timor-Leste. China, since independence, has been one of the active donors. I think in Timor-Leste, China can be considered as traditional donors, not according to the OECD perspective. So far, China has been considered as one of the active players in providing support to Timor-Leste, including this medical assistance. And China, the way China channeled its assistance, not on, but mainly through bilateral arrangement. And the way China provides also bilateral arrangement is mostly to government. And I think so far the only civil society organization that China provides assistance, not necessarily on the COVID-19, but also other support, is the NGO that happen to have also a connection with our famous, or Emma-Bot, you call it in Timor-Leste. So not necessarily the other NGOs, especially like those that are quite active or vocal. It does not have not provide support to them. This civil society organization that China provide assistance is called Kesadit. That's Centro Kesadit. That's an NGO that belongs to or run by the wife of the Prime Minister, Taruma Tanruak. And so far, it's perhaps quite, it's not really obvious to see that we have a competing in terms of providing support among versus the others. But we can see some of the donor countries, the way they react. Yeah? Like in the beginning, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the US more focused on its internal problem. But then later on, when China was a bit more sort of aggressive in providing its aid, the US stepped in, announced that it will provide, or it provides $1 million US dollar, $1 million US dollar to tackle this COVID issue. So I see in my view that Timor-Leste is in a state of need, and I see all the donors that provide support as a complementary. I think in this case, I inclined to have the same view as the government, that we receive donors rather than seeing it as a competing one another, but I organize it as a joint effort to help tackle these global issues. I'm not sure whether I answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that I just realized that today the book launches will be much later. I was afraid of our timetable, but finally they will be only at 3:30 p.m. in Portugal. So we'll have time, and I'm sure that because of the theme of Mika's presentation, we really don't want to cut this off. So we'll have now 2 questions coming from the Human Rights Center in Timor, in Dili. Yes?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Chair. We have 2 questions. The first question is from Professor Choi. You enter Professor Choi, please. First, I invite you to the...
Good to meet you, Mika. I have a very simple question about successful aid, how we can able to evaluate. Sometimes it's based on the diplomatic goal as a donor nations able to evaluate this is a successful or not. But I'd like to focus on more likely humanitarian viewpoint. So in the case of delivering a lot of aid, but if some people who in danger, they cannot receive. For example, I happen to see so many aid delivering to the government, but government do not have enough money or budget to delivering to the people directly, and then have some takes a long time to deliver. So in this case, in the China's aid case, what kind of tool Chinese government or Timor government preparing to delivering any kind of mask or whatever it is directly fitting for the people who demand it? If you know some detailed information, please share us.
Okay, so
maybe I can put the second question so that you have both and we can.
Yeah, it's better. It's better.
To save time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
The second question is from me. Very fast question. So you rightly mentioned the 3 levels of soft power. So institutional, reputational, and representational. And then, in your opinion, what is the target of the Chinese soft power in the COVID times in Timor? The government, the citizens, or the international community? Because I'm following the Chinese soft power toward COVID in other parts of the world, and I don't see so much communication about that. I see maybe more facts than fanfare, than communication, while in some other parts it's more communication than facts. So that's interesting. So who is the target for you, the government, the citizens, or the international community? Thank you.
thank you. Let me answer first the question from the first one. Mr. Chang, I think the way China, I think most donors in Timor-Leste, the way they arrange in terms of how to implement their assistance, mostly direct execution. It's quite rare to channel their money to the Timorese government to execute that money. In the beginning, for example, if we talk about the experience in the early 2000 up to 2010, 2012 or 13, I used to work for UNDP for 9 years. I know quite well about how donors channel that money and how manage that money. And in terms of China's experience, it's not that different well compared to other donors. The way China channel, especially in this COVID-19 assistance, is quite different. Not quite different, it's quite interesting. You see that I heard some, it's not a criticism, like some comment from a Timorese unofficially, although that person make a comment is official person, sort of like commenting on the way China handle its COVID-19 assistance. The way they arrange like a call the line minister, representative of line ministers to come to the embassy, and they provide that one rather than China, give to the directly to certain line ministers to distribute, or to the government to distribute. For example, in this case, perhaps a Minister of Health to provide the disseminations or to distribute this assistance. But China tried to help the government of Timor-Leste by call different line ministers to come to the embassy and provide this assistance. In terms of how effective or not, I don't have enough data for this. As I said, I'm still at a preliminary stage in terms of finding more information, the way China provides its COVID assistance. So I cannot make a lot of much comments about that. But as I said, that most donors, the way they provide assistance is mostly direct execution. implemented directly by them than by the host government. Mr. Chan? Hello?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your comment. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I answered your
Okay,
question.
so that's, I want to know just the current condition as much as you know. That's it, yeah, fully enough.
And I forgot the second question. I'm sorry, can you repeat, Adrian?
It's okay, thank you. Sorry for, I think that the chair would like to, you tell me, Susanna, if there is a couple of seconds more, otherwise I'm fine, we can go on.
No, I mean, there is time because these are, the other papers do not connect to this one. So I really think it's better that Mika replies now. And as I told you, I realized that we have more time than I thought because the book launches will be later on. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Mika, my question was, as I'm following the soft power of China in other parts of the world, and in other parts of the world, I see that China is investing a lot in communication, while in Timor, I didn't see. Say again? Did you say something?
I said I could not, in the beginning, I could hardly hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now, yeah.
Okay, I'm following China's soft power in some other countries, and I see that they're making a lot of communication about the activities they're doing for COVID. But in Timor, I was surprised about your reference to communication because maybe I wasn't paying attention, but I didn't see much. Actually, I didn't see anything. So as you mentioned, the three levels of soft power, institutional, reputational, and representational, I want to ask you, in your opinion about the Chinese soft power toward COVID, is this directed toward the government, toward the citizens, or toward the international community mostly?
Thank you, Adriano.
Thank you.
As I observed the way China engaged with other countries, including Timor-Leste, for Timor-Leste's experience in terms of China's assistance or China's engagement in communication, they do provide some assistance to Timor-Leste government. In this case, as I think, was it 2-3 years ago, China provides assistance to the TVTL, provide some equipment, if I'm not mistaken. But also, I forgot, I don't have the detail at the moment in terms of China's engagement in communication. But compared to different areas, especially like agriculture or provide a physical infrastructure, medical, the field of communication is not really visible, but they also tap into that. Maybe in the future, I don't know. I say that China's engagement in Timor-Leste has this long-term engagements. With China, maybe right now they do not really focus on this. But countries like in Africa, for example, one of the biggest areas China engage has an activity is in this field of communication. So in Timor-Leste at the moment, we have not have China's engagement in this area are not really visible yet compared to other areas, but they do have that. And in terms of the target, this is interesting how China's understandings of soft power, it's quite different from the way the Western in general, or other conventional understandings of this soft power. China's understanding of soft power is not necessarily that, like, for example, the definitions of soft power that made by scholars like Joseph Nye, where see power of influence, soft power over, this is hierarchical, where the way China defines its soft power is more like constructivist approach, more relational in this case. And it's not necessarily it defines as power over, but it's as long as it marks its presence there and has this good interactions with other party. For China is like a building stack, you know. So I see this one I could consider this as a soft power investment for a long-term engagement of China with different countries. Now, in terms of the target group in this case, I don't think China really cares for the people, especially the ordinary citizens. Yeah, I think could be mostly the government, and I think it's reputational for the international community to see that its engagement is worldwide or global, and as long as it has good relations with the host countries, particularly the government, you can see, you can observe the way it provides aid, as I said, mostly from the government to the government, and also focus on the strategic areas, I would say. And the civil society organization that it's decided to provide, I don't have reference for other country yet, but so far what I observed for Timor-Leste experience is target this organization that has, Emma Bot of Timor, perhaps engage or run this one. Perhaps this could be in a way a strategy to have less problem, or maybe they have problem is quick to solve, perhaps quick to deal with, because that's so far it's target the strategic areas and those important institutions in Timor-Leste. You know, if you see the picture that I showed earlier, the way China provides this assistance to strategic ministries, strategic areas like the police, the PNTL, the military, the FFTTL, and Ministry of Security, Internal Security. So these areas, I'll call it as a strategic areas. And in terms of the benefits, it's, I would say, more for the country of Timor-Leste, it's more to the government, I think. Although, like China, the way China provides assistance, it cares more visibility. Things that people can see, not necessarily that people, things that people not see. So having, when it provides aid, it has good communication in terms of disseminating information, provide this, good public, what do you call it? What to call have a good public outreach, I mean. Hello, Adriano.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the elaboration. I'm very grateful. And for your curiosity, or perhaps for a comparative perspective, I invite you to check what China is doing in respect to COVID in the Western Balkans or former Yugoslavia, where it's having a different approach to Timor in terms of communication, and could be interesting for you, especially in the country of Serbia. It might be interesting. Then we can exchange some notes if you want. But thank you for your answer.
Great. I come to your center to ask for that information. I haven't come across or read that part of the world's experience yet. Yeah.
So Sylvia still have another question, Mika, but I really think that it must be a really short question and a short answer. Sylvia?
Okay, thank you. Hi, Mika. I have been studied Brazilian image abroad. Then I will ask you, what's your opinion about the difference between the Chinese image before and after that COVID-19 diplomacy among the Timorese people?
Well, it must be a really short answer for a large question, Mika. Can you do it?
Not much different.
Okay.
That's the short answer. Not much different.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, Mika, and everyone for questions and replies. So we're now moving to Sylvia's presentation.
Thank you, everyone. I apologize for this.
No, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
So I can close my video
Yes.
now, right?
If you want, yeah. Sylvia?
Okay, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here participating in this panel and to have the privilege of listening and learning from colleagues. I'm grateful for the coordination of this session by Professor Susana. I would like to inform you that my presentation will be in Portuguese, but on the platform there is an English version. Em um ensolarado dia de dezembro de 2017, vestido com uma camisa reproduzindo uma bandeira estilizada do Timor-Leste, a FACAI inicia a apresentação do seu trabalho de conclusão de curso na Universidade Estadual da Paraíba, dizendo, entre orgulhoso e militante, que os jovens de outro tempo lutaram pela liberdade do Timor e que agora era a vez dele, a partir dos conhecimentos adquiridos. A fala de abertura do estudante é significativa para uma reflexão sobre os sentimentos envolvidos na experiência de estudar no exterior. Muitas vezes percebida como uma responsabilidade ou um compromisso para com seu país, realizar capacitação em universidades estrangeiras representa simultaneamente uma estratégia política do governo do Timor-Leste para a formação de quadros, um recurso das famílias para que seus filhos tenham uma formação profissional de qualidade, com aumento de chances de conseguir empregos e ascenderem socialmente, e uma oportunidade única de amadurecimento pessoal. As universidades lusófonas, particularmente portuguesas e brasileiras, têm recebido atenção. Isso porque o português e o téton são os idiomas oficiais, apesar de poucos serem os que dominam o primeiro. Reflexo de uma sucessão de ocupações externas, variedade linguística interna e conflitos políticos de múltiplas naturezas. Em um processo de State Nation Building, a partir da restauração da independência em 2002, Timor-Leste tem como desafio construir-se sob a lógica da autodeterminação. A cooperação acadêmica, o recurso à cooperação acadêmica e educacional com outros países tem sido uma estratégia política adotada para alcançar esse objetivo. A apresentação de FACAI, presenciada pela autora, é representativa de um modo muito particular sobre como os níveis internacional dos estados e dos indivíduos podem se articular em situações de migrações ou mobilidade em um mundo social marcado pela circulação de pessoas. É representativa ainda de uma concepção de si compartilhada por grande parte dos jovens da pesquisa que se enxergam como sujeitos de responsabilidade para com seu país, em especial os estudantes bolseiros. Finalmente, é representativa no encontro do olhar da analista com os seus interlocutores de uma simultaneidade que vai se formando entre a construção dos estudantes como sujeitos autônomos e capacitados na experiência migratória, os processos de autonomia do Timor-Leste e uma expectativa de devir comum baseada em uma ideia de soberania de quem deve decidir seu próprio destino e ruma nessa direção. São caminhos que se cruzam. Este artigo pretende apresentar brevemente algumas percepções de uma parcela dos estudantes timorenses no ensino superior em Portugal e no Brasil sobre o lugar que ocupam em um processo mais amplo de construção do Estado e da nação do Timor-Leste. A análise apoia-se em uma pesquisa etnográfica desenvolvida entre 2013 e 2019 com estudantes no Brasil, mais estreitamente junto a 30 alunos da Universidade Estadual da Paraíba, e entre julho de 2017 e abril de 2018, com 15 em Portugal. Lisboa, principalmente, Porto, Évora e Braga, de maneira presencial ou por mídia social. O Plano Estratégico de Desenvolvimento 2011-2030 do Timor-Leste foi formulado tendo como objetivo político maior State Nation Building timorenses na direção de uma lógica de autodeterminação. Segundo o plano, a educação e a formação são, entre aspas, vitais para o crescimento e desenvolvimento econômico do país, fecha aspas. No ensino superior, o plano prevê mecanismos de financiamento para diversas instituições, lembrando que a UNTL é a única pública no país fundada em 2000. A criação do Fundo de Desenvolvimento do Capital Humano, em 2011, fez parte da estratégia do Plano para a Formação e a Qualificação de Profissionais para atuarem nas esferas públicas e privadas. A iniciativa apoiou-se no reconhecimento da necessidade de desenvolvimento de recursos humanos através da educação em escala global e do esforço de capacitação em médio e longo prazos, gerando, abre aspas, maior competitividade global e fortalecendo o investimento na nossa soberania nacional, fecha aspas. Quanto às bolsas de estudo por país de destino, conforme o relatório do FDCH, Timor-Leste é o primeiro em quantidade de bolseiros, seguido por Indonésia, Portugal, Cuba e Brasil. Quanto ao nível de ensino, a maioria foi destinada às licenciaturas. Entre as áreas prioritárias estão medicina geral, enfermagem, parteira e farmácia. Os bolseiros de Dili e Balcal foram os mais contemplados. O Decreto-Lei 30 de 2008, no seu artigo 11, é claro quanto à finalidade principal das bolsas, dotar o país de recursos humanos qualificados para atenderem às demandas econômicas e da administração pública, fomentando o desenvolvimento do Timor-Leste. O fortalecimento da educação como estratégia adotada para o alcance do desenvolvimento do Timor-Leste, dentro de uma agenda voltada para objetivos a serem alcançados até 2030, está intrinsecamente atrelado a projetos de State Nation Building ainda em disputa quanto à sua melhor forma de concretização e ao seu resultado final. Para Guedes e Paulino, sobre protocolos de cooperação internacional para o desenvolvimento, o desafio é, abre aspas, atender às exigências das agências internacionais para colocar o Estado timorense e suas instituições nos trilhos da globalização. E também defender e preservar a sua identidade cultural. Já Cristóvão e Nogueira dizem não ser possível saber ainda os reflexos da experiência do desenvolvimento do país, embora se espere que uma rede de conhecimento e influências pessoais e profissionais se vá tecendo. O papel que os jovens timorenses desempenham nesse processo merece atenção, tendo em vista que a média da idade da população beira os 18 anos e que uma parte é enviada para capacitação superior com bolsa do governo. As possibilidades de cruzamento entre o projeto nacional em curso e os projetos individuais desses estudantes no retorno ao Timor-Leste podem ser decisivas para os rumos do país e dos próprios alunos. As decisões tomadas a partir de projetos individuais podem afetar direta ou indiretamente o projeto de construção nacional por obedecerem diferentes lógicas. De um lado, o sentimento de compromisso para com o Timor-Leste, que envolve dimensões geracionais de resistência à dominação estrangeira, como explicitado por Afacai, no sentido da construção de um Estado e de uma nação marcados pela autonomia, pela autodeterminação e pelo desenvolvimento em termos próprios. De outro, o vislumbre que a experiência migratória traz de oportunidades sentidas como melhores para empregos e estilos de vida nos países em que estudaram ou em seu entorno. A opção por uma orientação compõe um dilema enfrentado, em geral, pelos demais alunos provenientes dos países em desenvolvimento. De acordo com o Suburrana, os estudantes dos países de língua oficial portuguesa tendem a ter projetos pessoais que sofrem influência do próprio projeto familiar, do desejo de contribuição para o desenvolvimento do país de origem e do conflito entre voltar para as tradições culturais ou seguir no país de estudo, gerando incertezas no momento do retorno. É justamente por tais questões se apresentarem aos estudantes que RIS, em pesquisa junto a cabo-verdianos, no Rio de Janeiro, discute a ideia de que estudar fora corresponde a um rito de passagem, que liga um senso de obrigação para com sua nação, acompanhado por fortes vínculos culturais e afetivos com a sociedade de origem, a um cotidiano diferente do seu no país de estudo. As vivências diárias desses alunos em lógicas próprias do lugar onde estão, nas universidades em que estudam, nas festas e em outros eventos típicos com seus conterrâneos, muitas vezes podem gerar o que Mongói qualifica como uma identidade híbrida. No caso do Timor-Leste, o dilema enfrentado pelos estudantes parece ser da mesma natureza que o do país, no que se refere ao futuro e à construção da identidade self relacionada ao lugar e às tradições e a novos elementos experimentados pela influência estrangeira. Para Mandola Júnior e Galo, na experiência migratória, existe uma constituição mútua de self e lugar, já que o self é formado por fenômenos, dinâmicas e laços sociais desenvolvidos em uma realidade geográfica, produzindo um sentido de pertença a um grupo. Ao longo da pesquisa, nas entrevistas formais e conversas informais, a ideia de compromisso e de responsabilidade para com Timor-Leste e a família apareceu em vários momentos. Também foram feitas alusões ao papel da resistência durante o período da violenta ocupação indonésia por 24 anos, e alguns dos estudantes da pós-graduação mais velhos relataram terem participado dessa resistência. Em geral, há um sentimento compartilhado entre os bolseiros de que possuem um papel importante nos processos de construção do Estado e da nação. A contribuição para o país seria disponibilizar os conhecimentos adquiridos para o seu desenvolvimento. Outros relatos recorrentes remeteram ao fato de que, apesar de terem estudado fora, tinham respeito pelas tradições familiares e pelo Timor-Leste. Ainda que o senso de responsabilidade e compromisso para com o país não tenha sido unanimidade entre os interlocutores da pesquisa, a ideia de respeito parece estar relacionada ao que Matoso sensivelmente identificou ao ser perguntado em uma palestra para jovens diplomatas timorenses sobre qual a relação entre identidade nacional e dignidade. Abre aspas. Percebi nesse momento que a resistência do povo timorense à ocupação indonésia tinha sido uma luta para defender a sua dignidade. Agora eu vou passar algumas falas dos estudantes sobre esse assunto. Estou aqui estudando em Portugal, mas não posso esquecer quem sou eu, de onde vim e qual é o meu papel para com o meu país. Hermenegildo, estudante em Portugal, sobre o retorno ao Timor-Leste. Eu me formo este ano e voltarei para Timor. Quero ajudar o meu país, mas entendo quem não vai voltar, porque toda a gente quer voltar como eu. Mas aqui, na Europa, um advogado ganha 1.500, 2.000 euros. Lá vai ganhar o quê? 100, 200 euros? Manuel, estudante em Portugal. Sou funcionário do Ministério da Educação e vou voltar para ajudar a avaliação do ensino do português nas salas de aula. Eles precisam aprender o português. Vou colaborar com isso. Carlos, estudante de doutorado em Portugal. E agora a última fala. Quero voltar para ajudar o meu país a construir políticas públicas voltadas para as mulheres ou representar meu país em alguma organização internacional com que aprendi no meu curso. Virgínia, estudante no Brasil, que apresentou monografia sobre mulheres em cargos políticos no Timor-Leste. A palavra ajuda aparece de modo recorrente nas falas, atrelada em geral a uma ideia de maior responsabilidade na vida adulta, após terem vivenciado o rito de passagem do estudo no exterior. Com alguns desses estudantes, mantive contato no retorno ao país. Uma parte deles passou a trabalhar nos órgãos públicos na chegada, com demora de 3 a 6 meses para isso ocorrer. Uma parte dos retornados em 2019 ainda guardava emprego, pois a pandemia da Covid-19 afetou as contratações em Timor-Leste e no mundo. Seguindo agora para as reflexões finais, os caminhos que levam à autodeterminação do Timor-Leste pós-independência e ao amadurecimento dos jovens timorenses na mobilidade estudantil se cruzam no desejo compartilhado de autonomia e independência, tendo por base o respeito à dignidade do povo. As influências estrangeiras ao longo de suas trajetórias continuam impactando o modo como o processo de formação da identidade nacional do Timor-Leste vai sendo delineada, assim como o self dos estudantes vai se constituindo a partir da experiência migratória e as vivências em seu local de origem. Formados no exterior, ao retornarem, parte dos estudantes tendem a ser incorporados na administração pública, no caso de ainda não fazerem parte dos quadros. O que foi adquirido na experiência da mobilidade pode influenciar diretamente no desempenho das funções públicas. Modos distintos de olhar para o mundo e para o Timor-Leste é uma espécie de dupla filiação a 2 ou mais mundos sociais do país de origem e de estudo, em que parâmetros internacionais se combinam a tradicionais, podem afetar de dentro o próprio aparato do Estado através da atuação diária de funcionários sob influência do duplo registro externo e interno. É justamente nesse ponto de cruzamento dos caminhos em que o Estado timorense e os estudantes, em processos de construção de si, são desafiados a escolherem ou combinarem elementos entre as tradições culturais transmitidas de geração em geração e os padrões econômicos, políticos e sociais globais que a convergência pode se transformar em rumos distintos em uma encruzilhada de múltiplas possibilidades. Obrigada. Thank you.
Obrigada, Silvia.
Too late.
we now open for questions in English or Portuguese. Well, I have a first question to Silvia, and I will make it in Portuguese anyway. O que é que tu sabes sobre obrigada pela apresentação, que é sempre muito boa. E eu queria te perguntar o que é que tu sabes sobre alterações no apoio dado através das bolsas brasileiras nos últimos 2 anos, com a mudança de governo.
Obrigada, Susana. After I can answer some questions, another questions in the forum, okay? Because there is an English version, but okay. Thank you, Susana. I will answer in Portuguese. Susana, o que eu posso te dizer especificamente é que desde que o governo Bolsonaro assumiu o Brasil, em termos de orientação de política externa, não tem havido um privilégio de uma cooperação, qualquer tipo de cooperação no estilo Sul-Sul, e também, junto a isso, né, e é onde se enquadrava justamente, por exemplo, não só a participação em programas como do estudante convênio da graduação, estudante convênio da pós-graduação, os PEC-Gs e PEC-PGs, né, o que foi investido menos dinheiro nisso, foi dado menos prioridade nesse sentido, particularmente com alunos do Sul global, né? E paralelamente a isso, também esse governo não tem investido praticamente nada em termos de uma política de educação, nem dentro, nem fora. Então, infelizmente, nós estamos hoje numa situação muito pior do que nós tínhamos 2 anos atrás, quando a orientação da política externa brasileira era mais voltada para uma cooperação sul-sul, principalmente durante os governos petistas, né, de Lula da Silva e de Dilma Rousseff. É isso. Então, infelizmente, particularmente em relação à minha universidade, a Universidade Estadual da Paraíba, não foi mais estabelecido nenhum protocolo bilateral com o governo do Timor-Leste até o momento.
E, portanto, desde quando?
Com o EPB, com a minha universidade, o último protocolo bilateral foi em 2015. Então, ano passado, em 2019, foram formados ainda os alunos remanescentes, os que tinham ficado. Acho que não tem quase mais nenhum estudante timorense na minha universidade.
Só obrigada. Mais questões? Bom, se não houver mais questões, nós se calhar andávamos para a frente. As Silvia said, you can access the paper in English through the platform, and in that case, make questions using the platform, the forum platform. And so now we will have the presentation by Fernando Ximenes, who is in the Human Rights Center in Dili.
So if you want, you can already start introducing yourself. I will prepare the presentation.
Shall I start now?
Yes, if you wish. Give me a second to open the...
We have some 2%.
Fernando.
Okay.
Please.
see my face on the screen.
Yeah. Give me a second. I need to...
It's very off.
Do you have do you have a PowerPoint presentation or not?
I'm sorry, I just struck my point from my original research paper, and it is still unedited. And I just mentioned the key point that I will talk in this presentation about democracy and number by democracy, something like that. I'm Fernando Jimenez. Thanks from Maung Adriano.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for not sending you the documents.
Don't worry.
Early.
You're here.
And sorry?
Okay.
Okay. This paper will discuss how number-oriented democracy, or democracy by numbers, that are dominating the East Timor political democracy, for particularly during the 3 years of intensive, constant political impasse since 2017 and until and so on, till recently. And the number oriented democracy, as we perceive it, it is the dominant intelligence and political parameter that are dominating the East Timor political democracy. Now I will present, I will not discuss a much point on the aspect of numerality, but I will just focus on the organizational politics or party politics in Timor and the discursive of politics that happening or occurred in Timor-Leste. In this research, we intend to examine constant engagement of number and how number were placed within the regulations and orientation of institutional politics, as I mentioned earlier. But at the end of this, we aim to intervene, at least not to repeat something like an academic passivity, but to make a clear intervention to the political situation, particularly the political impasse that happening in Timor-Leste. So we concluded at the end, maybe I will explain later, how democracy are organized in terms of the false number, particularly backed up or sanctioned or organized by our political system that we are currently exist, parliamentary democracy. And by revisiting, by critically examining it, we will maybe we examined the inadequacy, inconsistent of number in East Timor political democracy in order to provide some analytical intervention on which is at the end that we will provide the real numbers that are necessarily could maintain an egalitarian political system. And thanks because we are now in the democracy center of democracy, but my paper will particularly criticize our current political system. Of course. But I'm not preparing it very systematically. But first of all, I will talk about the number, as you may outline in the paper. So we are totally live in the epoch of the number despotism, the tyranny of number, in which the number is to count, number is to rule, number is a collection of units. In addition, it is according to one of the famous living philosopher, Ellen Badiou in France. And as we know, numbers is everywhere, in polling, in state statistic, in policy review, on democracy scoring index like intelligence economic unit, kind of that. And number has spread all around the aspect of social and political life. And particularly on democracy, some scholars like Nicholas Ross in 1991 explored the specific links between democracy as a mentality of government and a technology role, maybe in terms of governmentality, and its relation with the quantification, numeracy, and statistic. And they argue that the democratic power is a calculated power, and it is calculating power, and it is recurring citizens who calculated about power. So in today, we argue that number first is calculable and then command. It is the situation that's happening in Timor-Leste when we use the number as our general guideline of how we measuring the politics, we measuring our political action, and there's we calculated it, and at the end, this number governs us. And in particular, during the political impasse, we particularly witnessing how the number command our political discourse, like like we hear that it is not necessarily for the minority to rule the government, and we have witnessing on how, for instance, both of majority in rule and minority in rule has no capacity to maintain an stability on the government. And on these particular conditions, witnessing provides to us where in which the number that we are quantifying, the number that we are formalizing in terms of law, parliamentary law, or political parties law, and the procedure on the parliamentary, for instance, like the sets that in the government majority in parliamentary, in order to maintain the stability to rule, has failed or has inability to prove that they can maintain the stability on the governments. For millennia, number has provided the full sovereignty claim over the certainty, over logical articulations of democracy. But in our current situation, we could raise some cynical questions or provocation, like if the number can provide the certainty in mathematical model democracy based on numbers, but during the 3 years of political impasse, we just facing the constant political and social uncertainty. In this condition, it reflects that democracy has no intimate correlation with the real numbers in what is the real numbers, but because the real numbers, as we perceive, is a universal, is a common, is a singular, is a multiple, and it is could provide something that can a true number of politics. Democracy by number in East Timor. Number-guided democracy was the dominant political mode practiced discussing in Timor-Leste parliamentary politics. To be able to conquer the power and rule executive authority, one should at least secure the majority seats in national parliament. And the example that I have already mentioned about the failure of the number in terms of our current political democracy, I have mentioned it. And these conditions have led to the sadistic rule and precarious democratic malaise, which is we have witnessing. We have no a political rule that can sustain the normal course of things in the government. The impasse during the years shows that the absence of single absolute the dominant party in Timor-Leste contributes directly to the ongoing political impasse, as the parties often recurs to the ephemeral or unstable coalition, alliance, and confidence supply in parliament. These particular terms or concepts like coalition, alliance, confidence supply, parliament, or more recently the informal coalitions between PLP, Fertlin, and Kunto manifested this political lexicon of how number govern our political attitude, views, and action, our calculation toward switches. Okay. Our democracy is a constitutional democracy, and the economic base of our country is a market economy. And at these conditions, our democracy can be conditioned, maybe in other, in some situation. Some theories consider this as a capital of parliamentarism, in which the representative state that are dominated by the capital. And at the other hand, our political situation also demonstrated what is so-called the market democracy, something like that. And our democracy is a formal democracy, and it is not a real democracy that in its pure sense, because when real democracy, it provides a situation that can be generalized, can be multiple, can secure that there is a real number of political practice or political presentation in there. Esteem of democracy functioned on the logic of logicis, and there are various topology of mathematics counted of number, and our current democracy is functioning based on the logicis and realism, but it is not. It is contradicts with what we consider as rational, real, and surreal number. This is the things that we are found very difficult in not from the it is in existence or absence in the formal democracy like Timor-Leste. How many times do I have? Okay. I will just focus. There's other things like people always perceive themselves as a difference between each party, but in fact they are A plus A equal A, which is mean that they are same. Look at that. My comrade is here. And our argument is that based on number calculations, they are difference under the indifference, which means that the difference is in the same of topology of indifference, which means that they are totally indifferent at the end of the history. And based on this, we are on the same line. We are on the same situation. We are on the same. There's no total real or authentic opposition, authentic contradiction. There's no real difference between them, because the system that they serve, the system that they are operated, the political party, the politicians, the parliamentarians, also only can provide the system that can provide something that working on the one system, on one theater, political theater. And it cannot be generalized, it cannot be multiplied. And once it cannot be multiplied or it cannot generalize it, there's no truth, there's no real politics, there's no real numbers. And the only thing exists is that democratic plurality, democratic consensuality that are now dominating our political system. For instance, like once the political party engaged in the tension, engaged in the interpretation of the constitution based on their needs of during the past, they interpreting it, they using it opportunistically. They using it because our legal system, our political system provide the plurality of the interpretation of political actions. And on this condition, we cannot find something that we could engage on what is the so-called real numbers. And at the end of this, for instance, like the political tension, all the politicians, all the ruling jurists, like all political commentators that are dominating the discourse of political discourse in Timor-Leste, they are oftenly recourse on the tribunal or the constitution as the final, as the guardian of the truth. And at this point, and we are witnessing that and all the politicians, political party, all engaged in the opportunistic instinct on exploited the law, the constitution, the institutional politics. In this condition, they are all same and indifferent, both of maybe Fredlin, Senerte, and so on. And because our politics cannot generate a real number or real order, the 2020 marked the continuing another shift in esteem political democracy. It is mean that a political voyage that leads to nothingness. We cannot escape this condition because we are in the same boat, we are in the same days, we are in the same choices, that we are totally not engaged in a real contradictions. And it is impasse is a constant and permanent conditions where when we are engaged on the same line, because there's no pure contradictions in there. Because when something dominated, we need something that can negate it, something that can overcome this with the other real solutions, with the real political solutions. Unlike recently, all politicians, political parties are engaging in the technical, in the non-antagonistic contradictions in a general, in a technical procedural contradictions. They are using it more opportunistically. And the reason from this all is a repetitive return to the same, because there's no alternative yet, no easy way of exiting Timor-Leste. Passing Timor-Leste reflect the absence of real singular politics that will strongly oppose a representative democratic state. And there's a lot of things in it. I hope that I still have much time.
The chair will tell you.
Okay.
But she's not stopping it because you can go, I guess.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. You should have just another 2 minutes to finish, right?
Okay. I will just mention the key points in here. Our democracy provides a situation where they disjunct or they cut out, they are put a wall between the political system with the real talk, the thinking of interiority, which is the truth, which is the base, which is the source of the real politics, the real talk, and because when the number can be calculable, it is not true, because politics cannot, the real number cannot be measured. It is an infinite multiplications. It is belong to the event. It is belong to the situation where we provide something radically true, and it cannot exist in our current predicament of political democracy. And our political system, political party, politicians, they treat number as an object, and that's the situation. They always treat the number as they always targeting the number, using the number, exploit it, and using it naively. Our democracy, they legitimate the natural ontological status of number. Maybe I will explain more this on the maybe in the research, in the complete research paper, maybe later. And our democracy has manipulated number, and because number naturally they have their own ontological horizon that provide their own basis of truth, universality, and so on. But our current democracy cannot provide it, and that's why the situation will always lead to the final punctuation of democracy, which is impasse. And now we are facing, we have witnessed in the crisis, the impasse, and then now we have no alternative yet, no real number, and we are facing a tendency of regression, which is we have witnessing on how the government are becoming more repressive, like trying to restoring the tendency of neo-authoritarian, like criminal defamation, right? The law of the defamation, like using the military to suppress the freedom of manifestation, and etc. etc. This is the condition when there's no political system that can provide real numbers, and the situation is we cannot overcome this, and this the final situation is that we should regress. This is the conditions. Um, we should therefore we should reinvent some politics that will overcome the empire or the tyranny of number, which is democracy as a form of government that sustaining the false number, the false contradiction, the false struggle, the false politics, etc., etc., that now dominating the East Timor democracy. I guess there are so many things that exist in here. I cannot outline for each one because there's a lot. I just extract a lot of things from my research paper, and I hope you could understand what because my English are very broken.
So very good.
I hope very good. Okay, thank you. Oh, Mr. Esteban is in there.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. We now open, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll now have questions and reply. We're open to the floor. If you want to, I can start while people think what to debate. In the texts that was being passed through, there was a moment in which you said that key messages to youth, students, etc., would say abiding from the one dissemination of the infinite. And I wonder who is, and this was a quote. So I wonder if you could explain better who was, whose phrase is this, so who said this, and what it means in your discussion in your critique of the current democratic ontology.
I think it's yours to answer.
Oh, what's the specific questions?
I believe.
Mana Silvia, can you repeat it? Oh, Mana Sujana. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was your paper is on the problem with number as a key concept, also perhaps related to big data and all this that is massive, and in current situation with the COVID, we are all feeling how it governs ourselves, and in one of the parts of the text that was passing, there was a quote, and I don't know who you were quoting, saying abiding from, so a key message to youth and students, abiding from the one dissemination of the infinite. And I wonder who you are quoting and how it connects, how the idea of an infinite connects to your critiques of the numbers.
Okay. Thank you for this very big provocative questions. I quoted the famous Maoist philosopher from France, Alain Badiou, and he a very philosopher that invented the theory of event, a revolutionary event, and a lot of more. And what he said that there's a one and infinite. Our current situation demonstrated that there is only one theater of politics, which is we only practice the politics in the government. In order to participate or rule the government, we should create a political party. There is only centralized political spaces, and one single political space that we should practice in the politics. But what we are proposing is to unbound from these spaces. We should create more spaces of politics, which means to generalize it, to multiply the space of politics, which is the possibility of an invention and the creation of politics of truth, and the politics that can be secured, the real numbers exist in there, not just with treating the people in general as a voters, as a subject populations, as in potency people that have nothing to do, but they just have their rights to vote. And this situation doesn't just demonstrate or cannot provide something that what we perceive as real politics, or that can be establish a real number on our political situation. And the infinite, the truth is not what perceived as a relative that is dominating in our current situation, because each one interpreting their own causes, their own desire, their own needs, their own political aspiration based on their relative opinion, sophism, and rhetoric. There's a lot of it. But in order to put the democracy based on the idea and the rational communication as maybe, I don't like that philosopher, Jürgen Habermas, but I would like to quote the rational communication here, but maybe we cannot ensure the rational communication in our political situation that are centralized in one system, which is the space is a single one. We need to invent a situation of politics where they should be multiplied. There should be a presentation rather than representation, and not representative by our mom, but big brothers. And the solution is to unbound from the unbound, to cut ourselves from the politics that we are now witnessing, the parliamentary democracy. So maybe I hope you got the points of this. Okay.
Thank you. Yes. I wonder if other people have questions or.
From the chat, there is a question, if I'm not wrong, from Sylvia, and then we have at least one question from the Human Rights Center, if there is time.
Okay. Sylvia, do you have a question?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Fernando, congratulations. Very interesting your presentation. I have one. How do the numbers impact the formulation of public policies related to social segments?
Social segments. Number. Yes. I will take some example. Like, thank you for the question. Number govern all of aspect of political, social, cultural, and economic life. And our formulation of public policy, for instance, like we are targeting for particular age, like engaging the youth on politics. We are provide from 70 years until. And for instance, we are calculating the index of development of the people of society based on for instance, like what they are the social capital, which is an important aspect, central aspect in the strategic plan 2011 until 30. It is provide a measurement, socio-political, economic measurement over the social goals, over the progress. And here's the conditions that are part of the strategic goals of this is to transform people into homo economicus, or maybe some kind of homo democraticus, like to become a good citizens, to become real citizens outside, differ with those that are living in the Fogo people or outside of Dili. Here's the condition that reflect on how policy was formulated by the government to govern the public economy, social progress, to regulate the social reality. That at final of this is to transform the society into a future market economy, future market society, a future liberal capitalistic society, kind of like that. And this is reflecting from the document like PDN, Strategic National Plan 11 and 13, and some others documents. Maybe if I'm not, I will not explain each one by one, but this is the some particular example that can reflect on how it is the particular role of state that they are codified, they are classified the people, they are define the people based on the state needs, based on the state perceptions. Like they are codifying the different social groups, social identity, the youth, the adolescents, the men and women, the students, the veterans. There are multiple social groups based on the statistic knowledge modeling number, and then state formulated something that will react to what they have codified in general. But in these conditions, we are saying that the people are reinvented as I mentioned it before, as subjected populations with a different social identity, social groups, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have two questions coming from the UNTL Human Rights Centers.
Yes, thank you. I leave the floor to Professor Choi, who will address the question. Yes, I can give you just the of course. So we have three questions. Let's see if we can make it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, I'm graduate Christian here. Okay. First of all, I'm very thankful for Fernando's presentation because I able to feel some authentic, some thinking and consideration for real democracy. And my key question, very simple. One question about your attitude to number. So, because your presentation, the two things makes your opinion appear because some kind of fake number. Well, it mainly come from some political struggle inside of parliament. I know because during the Timor-Leste many times newspaper talking about some every day is talking about numbers and the who control which parties. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel a little bit confused because you showing some aspiration or some missing the real number because you're talking about not representation. Directly presenting the democracy. It means maybe your idea, you are difficult to believe in number because this is a not perfect number. Not because it's a number, but because it's not perfect. So instead of talking about number from the parliament, I rarely hear some numbers issue of public opinion poll in Timor-Leste because people start direct opinion. How much percentage of people supporting which party or some which figures or which policy. So coming back again, my key question is, do you believe in number in the politics in Timor-Leste? Or if you'd like to believe, because this number is not perfect, so you cannot believe. Which one is your answer?
Okay. Thank you for this.
Very simple question.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Very simple.
So I'm going, okay?
Maybe we have another friends in here who could help us. We can discuss more about this. But the first thing that exists in the, like, we always perceive our democracy reflecting from Greece. But the things that exist in democracy in the Greece, for instance, what exists firstly is the science and the science of numericality, number kind of thing. And it is, they provide the passive, the procedure of truth. And but that's on the which is I just want to say that number, they have their ontological status of as I mentioned before, sovereignty in its own. They speak for its own because they are multiplied. Once they cannot be multiplied, we can find a real number. In these conditions, I'm not believe on number because I even can count in the dividing. I'm very poor in the mathematics discipline, but what the social and political apparatus that are currently dominating our political system, they're territorializing, they make the things out of their place, like number itself. They distorted the number, they manipulate the number because of our political and economic practice. Take, for instance, the reorganization of economic basis of our society, like how economy works in terms of the relation between the labor, value, the profit, etc., or the measurement of the GDP kind of that. Once we look at this, they provide a number. Just there is exactly a number that explains to some things, object, but at the end, where's all of this number? Because they cannot be multiplied, they cannot be generalized. They only representing, they are not presenting. And at these conditions, once we look at the GDP of the nation or the state, the majority of number that contribute to the GDP is those who have a capital, those who have money, and not generalized situation.
Nothing to count.
Yeah. Most of the people in the FOHO, they are non-monetized society. They are not part of our formal state-organized political economy, but they are affected for this. And in these conditions, we should change the political system. We should invent something that reflecting a real democracy.
So you need a direct democracy.
Not direct
democracy from the people.
So it is turning into the political discussion right now.
Can I add? Sorry.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, so can I add? Sorry.
If they can hear you, otherwise you can come closer.
And you guys, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I think we can, yeah.
Okay, now I can just stay here. Yeah, I totally agree with Fernando on, of course, first of all, there is no perfect system. And second of all, human beings have the tendency to be able to see physical sense. So we tend to like count 1 to 10, you know? So if we see number 10 there, then we're satisfied. For example, the number 30% of women in the parliament, the quota, yeah? So for example, if we do a gender analysis for Timor-Leste, people who don't know the actual situation, they are like, oh look, we have the most advanced gender equality in almost in the world, more than Scandinavian countries, yeah, participation of women in politics. Similar as what Fernando is saying about GDP. We count everyone, include the farmers, and what their income or as a whole, economic activity as a whole. But what appears most is people who with the most capital, people who own most capital, people who so of course I agree. A number, I'm not going to give you an answer here whether I agree or not. But then, yeah, we don't have a perfect way to see it unless we have a number. So my question to Fernando is like, beside number, beside what physical eye capacity to see, is there any suggestion? Is there any solution that could could satisfy you to respond to the complexity of, for example, I don't know,
Okay.
to answer like how to measure development or how to measure the economy?
I have particularly a very extreme desires. But okay, the invention at my last presentation, I mentioned the reinvention of politics. Therefore, the reinvention of politics, we need some kind of political radical solutions, not just reforming the political situation, but radically reconfiguring the political spaces, the space of politics. For instance, like you mentioned, the 50% of the women representing the women Timorese in the parliament. There's as I mentioned before, there's a total two contradicting value between the representation and presentation. Once the number has been multiplied, there's no more representation. When the situation has become a presentation of the multiple, of the many. But our current situation only can provide a presentation of a few, of a few dominant class on the political system. And only with the reinvention, only with the practice of the real politics, we could invent something, we could create something new. When we practice the politics within the, as I mentioned, in the centralized political theater, we cannot find the real number, we cannot find the real politics, because it is politics of the parliamentary representative democracy. It is the state, it is the politics of a capital parliamentarism. Something we should reinvent as politics is different with this condition, which means we should totally negating this situation and inventing something new. What is happening inside the parliamentary democracy, it is not new, it is not authentic in its pure sense. And only with this we can provide a real sense of development. We have witnessing on how the discourse of development have colonizing us. Like we are imagining Singapore, we are totally reflecting something that we cannot. We have known that they have a massive inevitable consequence, like dividing society, social inequality, and the development discourses dominating East Timor political democracy, our social life, where we are always talk about democracy. Everything is in the name of democracy, but democracy in what sense and what purpose that we should talk, because our democracy are aiming to sustain and maintain that political order and economic system, like market economy and representative capital parliamentarism, and our political system are oriented as to serve this, to maintain, to ensure this process go on and so on. And we should invent something new, something that can change the entire coordinate of social relations. And I guess maybe thank you.
Well,
Susanna, if there is a few seconds, I would like to make a comment, but you know better if there is still time.
No, of course. I mean, I thought there was still one question left, right?
Yes.
Is it a question or comment, whatever?
It's a further question that became a comment to make it shorter.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I think that we thought of finishing at 1 p.m. The latest, so we have 10 minutes left. And I don't think it makes sense to present the video that we have been able to present in the first session. I do think that what makes sense is that if any of you want to watch it, you do it using the link that is in the forum. And of course, this discussion is becoming quite interesting. So, so go along, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I want to say that it's fascinating, this idea that this fetishism of the numbers in democracy. I mean, of course, democracy has to be measured, as also Berta was commenting. You have to give some values, but of course, in this way, it becomes a performative exercise, a challenge, a continuous ambition to reach new rankings. And we know we are political scientists, many of us, and numbers are everywhere. Yet, I mean, for Timor-Leste, I believe it's particularly interesting how one single number is creating so many problems with true democracy, which is number one. Timor is number one democracy in the entire region. And Timor will be number one democracy in the entire region, even if the law on defamation is passed. Perhaps on the democracy index will be ranked a bit worse than 1 year before, but still will be the best democracy. Now, let's face it, it's 9 p.m. in Timor-Leste, we're criticizing the democracy, and it's okay, you know. We didn't have to ask to have this meeting. I had a chance to lecture around the region, and in many countries, you would have the police now listening to this session and deciding if you can have it or not. And most likely the police will come now, but they will come to pick us out because they have to go home. Yeah? So my question is, isn't this number one becoming a problem for Timor because justifies the elites to decrease the power of this democracy? Because anyway, it will be for many years the number one. You can do a lot of things, but it still will be number one. So the number isn't becoming a problem, only this number. But maybe it's more a reflection than a question. I mean.
I have no more armaments, but okay, we can add later. I like the zero because they have no periphery. Even you can say that there is zero, but they have a negative number above of it. But the zero is the center of our numbers. We cannot start anything from the zero, and therefore, if I work for the freedom of household, okay, something that can rank in the East Timor political democracy, I will rank East Timor with the number zero.
Zero.
Zero. Zero.
Maybe minus
Zero.
Yeah, because the source of the truth is it must be start from the beginning, and the beginning is from the zero, not from the number one. The number one is the maybe, but okay. So the problem in East Timor political democracy, we have witnessing the final punctuation of evolution of democracy in Timor-Leste. And when it is facing the impasse and the crisis and the aggressions, we have no other alternative other than democracy. If we fail to provide the alternative to democracy, we will return to the populism, we will return to the authoritarian, we will return maybe to fascism. And some political parties are now have a tendency to becoming so more repressive, as I mentioned before. And we must provide something that are very real difference with democracy. We can name it with democracy, but in some kind of some other structure of the political system. Our political struggle, we at the late political struggle for national independence, we came with the chain of the common goals. For instance, like we must struggle for the independence at the same time installing the democracy politics or freedom in under the democratic systems. But once the system cannot be generated more, cannot save it on exploited suicidal ending, like currently, like we are facing in many regions, like in Brazil, in Turkey, where country return into the populist right wing, etc., more repressive. We should invent and propose something alternative that is real, something that are radically different with the democracy. The problem for our current condition is that we are consensually pacified. We are pacified by the democracy. We are satisfied with democracy that exists right now. We should overcome these conditions. We should reinvent something that can secure the real ideal of democracy, which is in our condition like this, or in many other countries that are growingly became so capitalistic and fascist, it is, and even in Timor-Leste, it is very difficult to us to, it is impossible to talk about the meritocracy rule, the rule by the real meanings, or to restore the old slogan that saying the rule by the people. It is only and some kind of illusion. And I guess that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fernando, for this last moment of debate. And thank you all for this wonderful session. I think we should now end. It's late, and mostly late for you in Timor. And so, well, just clap to everyone.
Oh, Michael, it's.
Oh, Michael.
It was a pleasure to host this panel at the Human Rights Center of UNTL, an institution that the Global Campus of Human Rights is building through a European Union funded project. The center will be legalized as a UNTL new institution as of December 2020, and will then gradually provide research, education, and networking for the university. Please follow our project, globalcampusofhumanrights.org. I will be pleased to answer your questions and to be in contact. Thank you very much, and see you in the next panel that we are hosting on the 11th.
Good news, thank you. Bye.
Bye from Dili.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.